Good morning and welcome to San Jose State University. We're here today for what may be one of the most anticipated events in our university's history. I don't believe it's a stretch to say that the eyes of a nation and even around the world are upon us this week as we welcome some of the most prominent voices in sports, academia, journalism, and activism. They are here to talk about issues that currently captivate and energize the citizens of this country. When we launched the Institute for the Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change nearly 2 years ago, we did so knowing that San Jose State was the most appropriate place to house such a vitally important institute. Our history demanded that we lead, and lead is what we have done. Since then, we have convened thoughtful conversations about athlete activism and gender equity in sport. Members of our faculty have partnered with ESPN and the ESPY Awards to facilitate conversations with representatives from professional sports teams and various companies who sponsor those teams and their athletes. And the Institute is now engaged directly with professional sports organizations which are interested in these issues. So even though it is yet in its infancy, I am pleased to say that the Institute already has made a difference. It is having an impact. We are here today for what likely will be, at times, sobering and difficult conversations about sports, social activism, and societal change. But I believe they also will be, in the end, stimulating and inspiring. The topics could not be more relevant. Though it has been 50 years since track and field legends and San Jose State alums John Carlos and Tommie Smith raised their fists on the podium in Mexico City, the nation is still struggling with the issues of equality, human rights, and human dignity. It is therefore critical that we continue to challenge the boundaries of sport and activism. We use occasions like today's panel discussions to ask the big questions, the difficult questions that still vex our society. I'm grateful to the luminaries from professional and amateur sports, journalism, academia, and social action for lending their voices to today's program. We are particularly proud of the many Spartans who have used their careers in sport as platforms for change. Among those alumni are not only John and Tommie, but the esteemed Dr. Harry Edwards, who will open each panel and offer concluding remarks at the end of the program. For those of you who might know or fully appreciate his history and stature, and I can't believe there are many of you out there, Dr. Edwards has been at the forefront of sports and social change for more than 5 decades. The Institute organizing today's event bears his heart and his soul. It is enriched by his vision and intellect. Dr. Edwards inspired and led the Olympic Project for Human Rights. He has profoundly influenced the lives of many athletes and other leaders from the world of sport and beyond. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the spectacular, and I mean spectacular, Power of Protest exhibit currently on display on the 5th floor of the nearby Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Library here on campus, just a short walk away. It features artifacts from the Dr. Harry Edwards collection, the Speed City era, and the history of athlete and social justice activism. There are historic photos, autographed books, Olympic Project for Human Rights memorabilia, and correspondence from Dr. King and President Obama. I hope you will have an opportunity to visit the exhibit. You will really have to visit it more than once to truly absorb its impact. You will be glad you did. We are honored to have Tommie and John with us here today. The medal stand protest that we now commemorate with our iconic campus sculpture changed John and Tommie's lives forever, while also influencing social advancement. We are so proud to be a part of their courageous history and the sacrifices they endured. Sport and activism long has been connected. Today's panel discussions will bring both historical and modern perspectives. San Jose State University and its Institute for the Study of Sports, Society, and Social Change are pleased to provide a framework and structure that enables and empowers voices from diverse viewpoints to continue the dialogue. One of the enduring values at San Jose State is our commitment to social justice and purposeful student engagement, and ensuring that our students play a positive role in helping to shed light on the critical issues of our time. We also are a convener, a place that allows these important conversations to take place with diverse voices and viewpoints. So as we engage and learn from events like the one we are here for today, and as we celebrate our role in athletic activism, we constantly must ask ourselves how higher education and teaching intersect with student engagement. Our core mission at San Jose State is to educate a diverse student population for professional success and engagement in our democracy. And as part of that core educational mission, we must strive to develop students who are encouraged and equipped to ask questions, form views based on the truth and on their values, and engage actively in some kind of public service, whether that be at the national, local, or even neighborhood level. That is one reason why I'm so pleased that so many of our students will be here today. As you can plainly see, I'm very excited about today's program and am pleased that so many of you have joined us. On behalf of our university and broader community, welcome to San Jose State. And now I'd like to introduce the Institute's interim director, Dr. Ted Buttram.
Welcome to the third Words to Action Town Hall event of the San Jose State University Institute for the Study of Sports Society and Social Change. I'm Ted Buttram, the interim director of the Institute and a professor in the Department of Kinesiology. Today, 50 years removed from the events of 1968, including the founding of the Olympic Project for Human Rights and the silent medal stand protest in Mexico City, we will be discussing issues that are still clearly present in 2018. First, I'd like to take just a minute to share a bit about the Institute and more specifically, highlight some of the work that we are doing related to our three central pillars, including research, programming, and curriculum and education. With respect to research, our SJSU faculty and faculty affiliates from across the United States and Canada are working on studies related to a few primary areas of research, all of which speak in some way to issues related to social justice. First and foremost, and most appropriately for the Institute, we're midway through a series of studies on athlete activism from the perspectives of multiple stakeholders, including a focus group study we did with high school athletes on their views of athletes taking a stand for social issues. How do those issues that they see on television filter down into their own lives, and how do they make those issues their own with issues they see around them? And we've also done a study just coming out in the Journal of Sport Management Education where we looked at how corporate social responsibility professionals negotiate the current wave of athlete activism. So if you're a team, a league, a corporate partner, how do you negotiate the terrain of an athlete speaking out for whatever cause, and how will you do that in the future in a way that makes the most sense for everybody involved? As we move forward, we'll be moving on to other topics, including an effort to understand the complex relationships between technology, sport, and different lines of social identity, including race, class, gender, sexual orientation, age, ability, disability, as well as the crucial issue of athlete mental health and how coaches, athletes, and administrators can better deal with this growing public health concern. Regarding our programming outside of our signature events, which you are at today, we have worked hard to involve San Jose State students in everything that we do. To that end, on Monday, just 2 days ago, we put on the inaugural Institute Student Research Fair in the Student Union Ballroom here at San Jose State. Following an amazing keynote address by the University of Georgia doctoral student, Mr. Marcus Dexter, over 50 undergrad and graduate students from several departments across campus presented research studies and other scholarly endeavors. We know from the research that student involvement in research can bring class content to life. In other words, it's not just those names and parentheses in the textbook. They come to realize that they too can be those names, those scholars that contribute to the research base in their fields. And it was wonderful to see many students asking nuanced questions, collecting and analyzing data, and positioning themselves for success within and beyond their time at San Jose State. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, education and curriculum. A half-century ago, Dr. Harry Edwards had to fight against the now laughable notion that the critical, rigorous, and systematic study of sport was, as he phrased it at the time, the toy department of human affairs. Today, an academic minor in sport and social change, to be housed in the Department of Kinesiology, but featuring electives from numerous departments, again, across campus, is moving through the evaluation process. If things go well, and we are dedicated to making sure that they do, in 2019, students from across campus will be able to declare sport and social change as a minor and study the most pressing issues at the intersection of sport and society in ways that diversify and benefit their academic coursework. Thank you. And trust me, it's been a team effort, so thank you to everyone involved. So that's just a snapshot, really, of some of the work that we're doing at the Institute, including research, programming, and curriculum and education. We're doing a whole lot more, and we encourage you to follow our other endeavors on our website as we move forward. As we move now to our programming, and to conclude my remarks, I sincerely believe that all of us will leave this event with a deeper understanding of the issues our panelists and speakers are discussing, as we weave through the decades and hear stories of sport and struggles for social justice. I truly hope that one outcome of this town hall will be to help us set the tone for civil conversations and even thoughtful disagreements, not only nationally and internationally, but in our everyday lives, at sporting events, at coffee shops and pubs, around the dinner table, and certainly in our classrooms. And with that, that concludes my comments, and I'd like to introduce a short video, after which Dr. Harry Edwards will take the stage. Thank you.
So when I saw any degree of racism, discrimination, the flag went up, and I automatically began to raise questions, raise issues.
Why should we participate for a country and 100% effort and come back to our homes and are denied some of the rights that should be given us?
I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream.
We got athletes here with ideas of majesty. On that victory stand, that wasn't the price. The price was getting there. The exaltation of standing up there was about as frightening as you could ever imagine. I had to show solidarity with those who did not have a voice.
Two men made a statement that reverberated around the world. It was like a pebble into the middle of a small pond. And the reverberation of the ripples that went from the centre of that pond are still travelling. It's a very big pond. It's the entire world.
Very few people had the avenue to tell people how it really was or how we felt about a certain issue. You had to have a platform.
What kinds of things do you think athletes can do of a constructive fashion to move from protest to progress?
All of us as athletes, we have a platform. And for us to let our platform go without bringing about change will be a waste.
I am no different than any one of you. None of us are different than any one of you sitting out that audience. But the question is, have you found out who the man or the woman is in the mirror as we did? Harry Edwards know who he is. Tommie Smith know who he is. Lee Evans know who he is. I sure know who I am. Understand? I don't live for me, I live for you. The question is, do you live for everyone as well?
Our first panel is moderated by Dr. Ken Shropshire, Professor Emeritus at the Wharton School of Business, University of Pennsylvania, and currently CEO of the Global Sports Institute and Distinguished Professor of Global Sport at Arizona State University. Among his most recent of his 12 books, are The Miseducation of the Student Athlete, The Business of Sports, and Being Sugar Ray, the life of America's greatest boxer and first celebrity athlete. He has appeared as a commentator on programs about sport and society, on CNN, Nightline. He's been on the pages, presented columns and commentary on the pages of the New York Times, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, and Sports Illustrated. And we are fortunate indeed to have him guiding the discussion of our first panel. In dedicating the 50th anniversary edition of my book, The Revolt of the Black Athlete, I wrote a dedication to Muhammad Ali, which states, "It is typically only when a giant passes from among us and we stand blinking and blurry-eyed in the glaring reality of our loss that we come to truly appreciate the extent to which we all really had only been living in his shadow." And so it is with Muhammad Ali. But with analytical insight and effort, we have the capacity to distinguish and recognize those giants among us whose footsteps are still counted among those of the living. And today, with this first panel, we are privileged to be in the company of giants. It was my late friend, the illustrious Miss Maya Angelou, who said that courage is the greatest of all virtues, because without it, no other virtue is possible. And if the early to late 1960s required anything of those who would struggle to form that more perfect union in the arena or beyond, it was courage. That period was arguably from the assassination of Medgar Evers on June 12, 1963, to that of Robert Kennedy on June 6, 1968, the most politically violent 5-year period in this nation since the Civil War era of 1860 to 1865. The assassination of Medgar Evers, Normandy invasion veteran who volunteered for the military out of Mississippi, an NAACP leader who helped secure witnesses for the Emmett Till murder trials, was followed in quick succession by the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, that killed 4 little girls attending Sunday school on September 15, 1963, less than a month after the March on Washington. In June of 1964, 3 civil rights workers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney, and Michael Swerner, were murdered for having the audacity to register black people to vote in Mississippi. On February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X, a national leader that many in the black community and in the leadership of the FBI considered on a par with Dr. King, was assassinated in New York. And just over a month later, Miss Viola Liuzzo, who had left her home and 5 children in Detroit, Michigan, to answer Dr. King's call to travel to Selma, Alabama, in the wake of Bloody Sunday, and the attempted march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Miss Liuzzo was killed while driving back from shuttling marchers to the Montgomery airport. Dr. Martin Luther King, only 39, like Malcolm X and Viola Liuzzo, was assassinated on April 4th, 1968, followed on April 6th by the killing of Bobby Hutton, a 17-year-old in Oakland, California, and the first individual to join the Black Panther Party. And on June 6, 1968, there was this killing of Robert Kennedy. And between these, there were killings that attracted less attention in this nation and the world, and that are only remembered as anonymous incidents in the local communities where they occurred today. This was the general social political climate and context within which those comprising this panel stood up and spoke out in 1968 and essentially declared, "We are better than this." In the wake of the assassinations, violent demonstrations over a war that divided families and fractured this nation, and that ended the Johnson presidency, in the wake of cities burning, following the assassination of Dr. King, it was these individuals who had the caliber of courage, the content of character, the scope of consciousness, and the depth of commitment to stand and declare to the world that we, the people, are better, and we demand that our society and our nation do better. Spencer Haywood is an Olympic gold medalist in basketball, a Basketball Hall of Famer, and an NBA champion. While some were critical of him for going to the 6-day games, after Lou Alcindor, now Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lucius Allen, and Mike Warren boycotted the games, Spencer Haywood made a contribution subsequently that likely would have been impossible without the certification and the prestige of an Olympic gold medal. At the time, the NBA prohibited the signing of college athletes before the graduation of their college class. Spencer and the Seattle Supersonics, which had signed him against this rule in the NBA, took the NBA to court, and the United States Supreme Court eventually called foul on the NBA. And so today, every college athlete who has signed a pro contract before his class graduated from college on some given day should stand, bow from the ankles, and thank Spencer Haywood on this for the service that he delivered. In April of 1968, I received a call from Kurt Canning, a young man from Utah who was a captain on the Harvard University crew team. During the work of my research for my master's thesis on a Black Muslim family at Cornell University, I had read a segment from Malcolm X's autobiography in which he talked about having given a speech, and afterwards a young white student, a female, walked up to him and said, "Mr. Malcolm X, I agree with your perspectives. I understand what you're saying. What can I do to help?" Malcolm looked her in the eye and said, "Nothing." He reported in his autobiography that he regretted that from that day forward. This young lady left sobbing, broken, fractured, and he said that was one of the biggest mistakes of his career. He said that in talking to Kurt Canning, I remembered that. And so when I got this call from a young white man from Harvard University, I said, no problem. But that wasn't the first time that that lesson from Malcolm came into play. I was sitting in my office one day when I got a call from 2 white women from Marin County who said, "Professor Edwards, we heard you on the radio this morning. We want to know if there's anything that we can do to help. We heard that you had designed a button and that you were looking to produce those buttons to be distributed to anyone who would take them. Is there any way that we can pay for those buttons?" And I said, absolutely. I did not walk away from that at a time when whites and blacks were splitting over the Black Power movement, because I understood what Malcolm was saying. So I accepted Kurt Canning's call, and thanks to funds provided by the Grateful Dead, I was able to get on a plane and fly back to Harvard University and meet with the Harvard University crew team. In essence, without the support of 2 white women from Marin County, the wife and daughter of Al Stump, the Ty Cobb biographer and sports reporter, without the Grateful Dead providing funds for my trip to Boston, without the bag of buttons that I left for the Harvard crew team to wear and to pass out at the games, the chances are very good there would not be a Peter Norman in the picture on the victory stand wearing a button in Mexico City. It was Paul Hoffman who gave a button to Peter Norman on his way to the stand. Here today, representing the Harvard University crew team, are 1968 members Cleve Livingstone and Paul Hoffman. By 1968, the historically black institutions were already losing in the competition for many blue-chip black athletes. They were very concerned about our demand about the hiring of black coaches at traditionally white institutions. Our statement, why should we play where we can't work? And as Stan Wright, one of Jim Hines' coaches at Texas Southern told me, we already can't recruit our best athletes. We can't, now you're saying we shouldn't be able to recruit our best coaches. Who do we recruit if you're successful in what you're doing? So we don't support what you're doing. Still, some athletes from historically black colleges and universities found their voices and spoke out in support of athletes who were demonstrating. One of those individuals among them was the illustrious Miss Wyomia Tyus. Wyomia was a member of the famed Tennessee State University Tiger Bells, known the world over as the program that recurrently produced the fastest women on earth, and in the mid-20th century, one of the most prolific and accomplished international sports programs in the world, having produced some 23 Olympic medals long before Title IX was ever instituted, mandating parity and support for women in sports. Ms. Wyomia Tyus is the two-time Olympic champion in the 100 meters and the first athlete, male or female, to win consecutive gold medals in that event in 1964 and 1968. The incomparable Ms. Wyomia Tyus is another member of our panel. And last but not least, Doctors Tommie Smith and John Carlos are on the panel. These two men, along with Lee Evans, are among the most courageous and committed men that I have ever had the privilege of being associated with or working with. Like other activists in 1968, I had received hundreds of death threats. And once I left San Jose State and went to Cornell, those death threats followed me, including some death threats that were sent to me at both Cornell and Berkeley that I was asked to forward to Tommie and John. So I get some notion of the pressures and challenges that they were confronted with. I have met few people with the caliber of courage and consciousness and commitment to stand on a podium in protest of racism, discrimination, and injustice in the face of this kind of pressure. It is therefore entirely justified and deserved that the photo of the 1968 Mexican Olympic podium demonstration by Tommie Smith, John Carlos, and Peter Norman has been judged in many media circles as the most iconic sports image of the 20th century. John Carlos and Tommie Smith are with us today. Today, we can stand taller and see farther and comprehend more in terms of current developments at the interface of sport and politics because we stand on the shoulders of those on this panel. Please welcome Professor Shropshire and our panel, which today casts the shadow of a giant. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. So my job is simple and complicated. I'm supposed to say as little as possible and let you enjoy hearing the voices of 1968. So I'm going to get right to that. And I know, I hope you are as excited about this as I am. Let me start off with Paul and Cleve. Harry just gave a great introduction about the Harvard rowing team and your role in this. So let's go back. Let's take ourselves back in the time machine to 1968, maybe 1967. What motivated a bunch of white guys to invite this big black 6'7", 300-pound black man to come to Harvard University in the atmosphere that he described was going on in that 5-year period, 63 to 68? Paul, why don't you start off? What motivated you guys to do that?
Thank you, Ken, and hi, everybody. It's sort of interesting. This is my first time back at San Jose State since 50 years ago when Cleve, whose dad was a professor at Sac State, suggested that the way to find out more about the Olympic Project Human Rights, which we'd been talking about all summer as we were training for the Olympic trials, was to go and see them. And we won our trials down in Long Beach, and we were one of the very earliest teams selected. And the guys in the crew had said, you know, we really need to find out what this is all about. And Cleve and I were
how old were you guys then? Just to, especially for students out, how old were you guys?
Well, I had just graduated, so I was 21 or 2, I guess.
21 or 22, okay.
And Cleve was a year behind me in college. And so we called up and made an appointment to come down to office hours and drove down from Sacramento and walked in. And Harry Edwards was, as we all were, not only much younger. In fact, one of the interesting aspects of all of this is how young we were.
How young everyone was, right, exactly.
And frankly, how naive we were. Harry Edwards was a hell of a lot less naive. He was, he welcomed us and said, you know, we said, we're really here to find out what the Olympic Project's all about. And he spent 20 minutes describing what they were doing. And then we said, well, could you come back and talk to the crew, the rest of the crew? And he said, I'm not going to come back unless somebody commits to do something. And we said, well, we're a team sport, so we can't speak for the team. We can only speak for ourselves. But Cleve and I said, we'd be happy to commit that we would support publicly the goals and ideals of the Olympic Project. And we thought we could figure out something to do that would spread the word. And so he came back, and this marvelous scene of Harry Edwards wearing a dashiki and these jumbly beads and the dark sunglasses and the Harvard Heavyweight Lounge. The Harvard Yo Race was the oldest intercollegiate sporting event in America. And everybody who ever rode there was, you know, old white debenture holders on the walls of this dark wooden room, and there he was. And 6 of the crew that afternoon gave a press conference with him to announce our support. And we committed to write to every member of the Olympic team as they were selected and ask for there to be a dialogue, and asked for our teammates on the Olympic team to make the effort to find out what our black teammates were talking about and worried about.
So Cleve, let me ask you this, as you can correct anything that may be incorrect there. I mean, the joy of these conversations is the little nuances that people remember that others don't. But Cleve, if we think about today, where are the white athletes today?
I think that's a very good question.
That's why they pay me the big.
And I'm really not sure where the white athletes are.
I mean, and to be clear, there certainly are some, but
yeah,
but not in the way you guys.
I really expected to see a lot more support for Kaepernick and the other NFL players who were taking a knee or otherwise indicating their support for racial justice in this country. And I've been a bit disappointed by the lack of that support. I think it's really interesting. You heard Harry Edwards describe the tenor of the times, and we think now that this country is really polarized, but in a way, I don't think it compares to the polarization that existed in this country back in 1968. And it wasn't just along racial lines, as Harry indicated, it was along lines with respect to the war in Vietnam. It was along class and economic lines. It was also along cultural lines. I mean, 1967 was the summer of love in San Francisco, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And there was a very large cultural divide as well. And I think that gave rise to a lot of interaction between white athletes and black athletes and athletes of color in general, which resulted in a lot more support than you're seeing today. And I'd like to figure out a way where we can start to get that interaction going together again at a level that would generate that kind of support.
And Tommie and John, let's stick with the duet kind of form of conversation here for a moment. I mean, you guys have had a chance to say a lot about this over the years. And again, I just want to take you back to that time. And Dr. Edwards and I were talking yesterday about what we think people would want to hear in terms of that moment and what was in your heads at that moment. And the three things we were most interested in were the level of fear, the purpose that you felt at that moment, why you were doing it then. Because as I said, these things have evolved in terms of broader statements, but what was the purpose then? And I think this one is most obvious, your level of commitment at that moment, how strongly you were committed to the idea. So Tommie, why don't we start off with you? Just first the level of fear that you had at that moment, and maybe descriptive of what that was, if any.
Since the strength of that multifaceted question, I'll just take part of it and leave some for John.
Okay. Partnership once again.
Yeah, chip it off and move it over. First of all, I'm very happy to be here and be atop another platform with a whole lot of help this time, you know, and that makes me feel good coming home again. I often thought back in terms of the dedication that I felt to society, from the cotton fields of Fresno, California, Lemoore, Hanford, Tulare, all the way to the victory stand, that if I get a chance to do something to bring a light or instant focus why racism is so apparent, I would have done nothing. But it was apparent. I didn't see it until later on in life. Then I became dedicated even more when I was invited to join a program in its infancy, which was the OPHR, to dedicate some part of my running to a better condition in America. And these points were pointed out to us very, very straightforward. And I joined that battle against racism, the stupidity, the ignorance of a society who was not representing its congregation the same, or the public the same.
And Tommie, how old were you at this time?
I was 23 when I started this thinking of going in a direction which I wish I didn't have to go in. Right. But it was my responsibility. I had a charge to keep, and that charge was to make better as best I can, because John Carlos and Tommie Smith held two of the top positions in the world, the fastest humans in the world. And I felt because of that platform, I was responsible. So that's why I joined, and with the backing of the program, Dr. Harry Edwards and the four women who was also on that program. You don't hear about that very much, but very apparent. 4 women backing that program in those beginning seats. I was rather excited about doing something to make better for the black students on that campus and around the world, the United States for sure, and systematically in San Jose. So I joined. It grew from there to different races to get to the victory stand, and talking to people who were sincerely positive about the OPHR and its direction towards society.
So the commitment was fully immersed.
It was like picking a row of cotton down in Lemoore. Yeah, I was ready for it.
and I know Spencer's biting at the bit of another former cotton man over here, so we'll talk about that, which is kind of ironic that background is on the stage with us. So the commitment and the purpose at that moment on the stand, what were you thinking about most in terms of why you were doing it? John, you want to start off with that, the purpose at the moment when you were on the stand?
Well, the purpose was to bring awareness to society that we had a social issue that people wanted to bury. They didn't want to face this issue. Going back to your question as to why would you become involved in something like that, for John Carlos, I think I was born June 5th to be in Mexico October 16th, 1968. I saw a lot of things. It's like God prepared me for Mexico City. I was born in Harlem, New York. I was born in the era when they had white flight. Began to look at what was happening in my community. We was a multicultural community. And then all of a sudden, it looked like white folks had a meeting that night and decided that they were gonna move out. And I'm asking my dad, why are they leaving? My father said to me, he said, son, I don't know, but I would think they possibly moving because they didn't like the fact that domesticated workers were now their next door neighbors. Then I left New York and I went to Texas. I didn't realize that Texas was the South until I got in the airport and I saw the sign say, white restrooms only, white water fountain only, and this is 1965. Then I left Texas and I went to San Jose. And San Jose was kind of segregated relative to students. Young black students would come here, they couldn't find fair housing, they couldn't find fair employment, and they wasn't accepted to be free enough on the campus to select the courses that they chose to take. So, you know, when I was in Texas, I heard about these guys down here in San Jose State forming a unit, you might say, the Olympic Project for Human Rights. And I was reading the magazine, I think it was Track and Field News, and the things that they were saying, I was very much impressed with. Because these individuals seem like they're saying, we're willing to roll up our sleeves and get dirty to try and bring awareness to the ills of society. I applauded that. I thirst for that. So I came to San Jose State with a purpose in mind. By the time we got to Mexico City, and once the races was all said and done, a smile came on my face, like a godly smile, like, yeah, now let's get busy. Let's get down to what I came here for. Because I went there to specifically make a statement. I think we wanted to do something that would be profound, yet and still nonviolent, that would radiate throughout society. And I think 50 years later, we hit the nail on the head. That people are still, thank you, please, no more of that. So, you know, in terms of commitment, the commitment was there, I think, in my first breath. To see various things in life. It's like a clock. You see, the clock is not keeping up with pace. So as a young kid, you want to take the clock loose to see if you can fix it. And that was my ideals in life in terms of dealing with social issues in this society. As a young man, you know, you asked how old was Tommie. When we went to Mexico City, it was a transition that took place amongst the three individuals on that victory stand. My birthday was June 5th, 1945. Tommie Smith's birthday is June 6th, 1944. And Peter Norman's birthday is June 15th, 1943. So he knew to pick the Geminis. He knew we were just strong enough to do it. But in essence, we wanted to reach the far ends of the earth because it's not just people here in the United States that have issues of social justice and so forth. There's people on the far end of the earth that have the same issues. We were like a roadmap, the new paradigm, to educate society that, hey, you know, we can come together. You know, everybody got uptight about the fact that it was a fist. Just like with this young man, Mr. Kaepernick, you sit back and you think about, he says, I'm concerned about the injustices in the police department. Somebody put a spin on that and said, no, he's anti-flag and he's anti-military, which is far from the truth. We put our fist to the sky basically with a black glove because that was the first time that the Olympic Games had ever been televised in Technicolor. We want to let them know we represent America, yes, but the ills of society has pushed black people down into the ground in terms of us never being standard Americans. We was always substandard. So we want to make it clear, yes, we represent America, but we're representing the black America first. Now, relative to the
John,
security.
Let me yeah, I know where you're going to go. So John's very serious about those applause. So hesitate and applaud for everybody else, but watch out, it evolves into a whole thing. So just leave them alone on those applause. But John, we're going to come back, and I do want to talk to both of you about, and maybe I'll recast it away from fear into the moment of courage. But we'll come back, because I want to get to Spencer and Wyomia to get them in the conversation. And Spencer, I'll start off with you with more of that courage kind of question. I mean, Harry in his intro said that, you know, the basketball greats at that moment, Kareem, Lou Alcindor, and Lucius Allen, and Mike Warren, those guys had decided to boycott. Here you were, this kid, you were 19, right?
No, I was 18.
18.
18 when
I'm telling
I tried out for the Olympic team.
It's never too soon to make these big decisions. So, and Mississippi, Colorado Junior College, a little time in Detroit, and you had to make this decision: am I going to play or not? So tell us about that courageous decision.
Well, how that decision came about was when Kareem stepped down, Elvin Hayes signed his pro contract, and Wes Unseld signed their pro contract, because you could not play in the Olympics if you were deemed a professional. So the Olympic Committee went searching high and low for replacements, and they invited everyone from the NCAA, NIAA, and all of the other universities and the military to come and try out for the Olympic teams. But they didn't allow freshmen to try out, and I was a freshman. And they decided, well, you know what, to keep from having a lawsuit or anything, we will bring these freshmen in from junior college. And that's how I got to Albuquerque. Now, being an old cotton picker from Silver City, Mississippi, a lot of hard work was what I did. And so I went to the tryouts with the idea, well, I'll get me a bag or so, and I go back to Detroit and tell everybody I tried out. And I went down there, and guys were like complaining about the Converse shoes and Adidas shoes too tight and stuff like that. And I was just playing hard every day, because I was used to picking cotton and working in the fields from sun up to sundown. So they had 2-hour practices, and I was like looking at them like, well, that's all? and so they said, well, this kid wants to play and he want to practice some more. So I would stay after practice, and I would work with the coaches, and I was just playing hard and just loved and enjoyed being there. And lo and behold, when they started to select the team, they said, well, who was our first player pick? And they said, Spencer Haywood. And I was like, oh my God. I don't have a birth certificate. And so that was the first thing that came to mind, is I don't have a birth certificate. So right away they called the store where my mother used to work in Silver City. She was a cotton picker, and so she worked part-time in the store. So they called that store, and they said, well, Mrs. Eunice, we need to have Spencer's birth certificate. And she said, sure, I have it right here in my Bible under John 21. Because I was born by a midwife, and we didn't have birth certificates and stuff there. So we had to go there and get the stenographer.
And this is not that long ago. Now,
this is not that long ago. No.
This is what happened, though.
This is what happened. So we then came back, and we got the birth certificate, and I get ready to go to Mexico City. And lo and behold, my name is spelled Spency, S-P-E-N-S-I-E, because the midwife couldn't spell Spencer. So I ended up in Mexico City, and my gosh, when we came in on the bus, they were wiping up blood because the students had a riot. So we were like, oh my God, what are we doing? And then, you know, the older players, because, you know, we look at the other guys on the team like Tommie and John and you guys, it was like, and Wyoming, we were like, well, wait a minute, we these young guys, we're coming in here and we're going to enjoy this thing. And then I ran into George Foreman. He's like, well, how much food can we eat at the commissary? I mean, we were just these young guys, you know, having fun and looking around saying, what can we do? And it was a joyous moment. So we didn't get a chance to, I didn't get a chance to see the inner workings of it because I was just happy to be there.
Just in the moment.
Yeah, just into the moment.
So I want to come back and talk about your return in a bit, but I want to get Ty in Wyoming, and again, another moment of courage. I mean, Harry said, and I think it's very interesting, that the HBCUs, the historically black college universities, were largely not participating with the Olympic Project for Human Rights. So it's pretty striking that you both widely supportive, you dedicated your medal afterward, and there's a photo that if you haven't kind of Googled around where you clearly have your fist up on the victory stand at the relay as well. Where did that come from for you individually to do what wasn't happening at HBCUs? There wasn't this mass involvement by athletes, and specifically at the games from HBCUs that did not participate.
Well, I think for me it was growing up in the Jim Crow South. I grew up in Griffin, Georgia, on a dairy farm, and I grew up with 3 older brothers.
I'm glad you weren't picking cotton, too.
No cotton. Thank God my father said none of that for his children because he had picked enough cotton for everybody. Okay. So we never had to pick cotton, and we never had to milk the cows either. So, but growing up with 3 older brothers and loving being outside, loving doing sports, whatever it might be. And you have to think about the Jim Crow South, and also being a black young child or young woman in the Jim Crow South. Women were never, we weren't encouraged to go out and do a lot of things, and especially in sports. If you were, it was like, okay, you can go out there and play, but don't sweat. You know, how do you not sweat and play sports? But so mine started very early. I always think back when I was about 6 years old, and my brother that I'm next to, it was around Christmas time, and he wanted a cowboy outfit. And so I wanted a cowboy outfit. And my mom kept saying, well, no, we got to get you a cowgirl outfit. And I said, well, no, I'm not going to wear it. I want a cowboy outfit. And so this went on, and my dad finally said to her, you know, she's not going to wear it, so you should let her have her way, whatever. So at Christmas morning when we woke up, and I had my cowboy outfit. And so I started fighting then, I think. I started fighting for what I believe in, because that's what my parents had taught me. You fight for what you believe in, you fight for what's right for you. If it feels good to you, you're not hurting anyone, you need to fight for it. So I started then as just saying, this is what I want as an individual. And then that led to other things. I went to Tennessee State, where Tennessee State was the only school giving any type of scholarship to women. And you think about the whole of USA and Tennessee State, a historical black college, giving scholarships to women to get an education. And I look at Mr. Temple, who was the coach, and think about how in the world could he have done that. From 1956 to 1992, he had all these strong black women, and he made us believe in ourselves that we could accomplish whatever we wanted to if we fought hard enough. And the fact that you can if you get an education, he said sports will open up the doors for you, but the education will keep the doors open. And he made us believe that we could do that. And I think about the fact that how did he know that we could? I always say, how did he know that I could? How did he know I had that strength that I didn't even know I had? And he brought that out of not just me, but so many women. We talk about the 40 women he put on an Olympic team. He also graduated 98% of his Tiger Bells. And these are people not even going to the Olympics, so 98% is well. And they not only just Mr. Temple, also growing up in the South, and the teachers and a lot of people, not everybody, but some people in the communities, they really pushed you. They didn't want you to work as hard as they had. They wanted you to have a better life. So I came from that, and going to Tennessee State and being able to see, get an opportunity to travel. And Mr. Temple would say, well, you can go to Europe and you can go to the Olympics and win medals and come back to America, and nobody knows your name or nobody cares about what you've done. But over in Europe, everybody's celebrating what you've done. So they're looking at you because you are a black person, and they're not giving you any credit. You can go and win all the gold, you can go and bring all the praise to the US, but when you get back here, I still had to go to the South and drink from the colored water, so to speak, So I grew up with all that, but all that did was make me stronger, and I think it made a lot of other people stronger. We don't talk that much about women and the struggles they have had, especially during that time when nobody was there so much for us to say what you were doing is okay. We believe in you, so you have to truly believe in yourself. And when we went to the Olympics, I'm all for human rights, and I've been, like I said, fighting for that. And we went to the Olympics and we were talking about the boycott, and people were asking, well, are you going to boycott or are you going to boycott? And Mr. Temple's favorite thing to say to us, he would always say, well, you can't boycott something you have not made. Once you make the Olympic team, talk about it. And that's what happened. We went to Mexico City, and this is kind of when I got more involved and talking to everybody in the village, talking to Tommie, Carlos, all these people in the village, and having meetings and discussing about what is happening just to people of color and especially black people in America. How could we do something? What kind of protests can we do? Everybody's not going to do the same thing. We know about movements. Movement takes all different shapes, all different forms, and we need a lot of people and everybody to take part in the whole movement. And I was just one of few people that was taking part, one woman that was taking part. And when Tommie and Carlos did what they did on the victory stand, I was right there in the stand, and I can remember it so vividly when they walked out the chute to go up onto the victory stand. And I was looking down, and I was like, they don't have shoes on. What's going on? And I was like, okay, let me see what's going on. And then they get on the victory stand, and I'm like, what are they going to do? When the national anthem started and they did this, it was like, oh my. And the stadium got completely quiet. It was just eerie, just no one was saying anything. And as they continued to play the national anthem, you could hear people talking, and then you could hear people booing, you could hear people whistling, you could hear people cheering. And then I just started feeling, oh man, I hope nothing happens to them. Because they're right out in the open. I hope nothing, someone does something.
And that's a great descriptor to get back to the question I was asking you guys about fear in the moment. In that moment on the victory stand. I've seen bits and pieces from both you guys in various places about that. But everybody talks about how quiet it was, and what was there fear in the moment?
For me, it's been the year before then, and even especially then, but it had gone beyond fear for me. It was in a particular situation where you must do this regardless of the fear you might have.
You got to do it.
Yeah, you have to do it. Your life is dedicated to that. My interest was the quietness that Wyoming Tai spoke of a few moments ago. I heard that same thing, okay? Then the flag began to ascend, and the music came, and my behavior was about in prayer. I could have finished 5 prayers because the national anthem was about an hour and a half.
Seemed like it anyway.
Yes, right. So the courage of my not being afraid because I was beyond that point was an indication to me that you are protected, because the charge I had to do what I had to do was enough to have any type of positiveness about the whole situation. And I've said this before. It's really sad nationally that the two young black athletes had to do what they were doing to bring attention to the radicism of our country, representation thereof. We had to sacrifice to prove a point. And we were vilified because we had to do this. Yes, it was better than picking cotton, but at least if somebody threw a rock at me, I could have ducked down in the cotton field and been hid from any kind of oppression. But this was the real thing. My life was put on a stand to be vilified physically if the necessity was there. And I think John said earlier that the charge that we had was a spiritual moment in the lives of America. That here's two young black athletes sacrificing for the cause of everyone. Notice there was no sound from me or from John of what we were doing. My identification of it later on in life viewed as this is you on the victory stand, using a need by someone else to sacrifice for the cause of you being who you are, and hopefully where you're going will be as positive as our stand on the victory stand in the sacrifice for all of America. So for me, it was more than just standing there being cool. Being cool, the man held a world record, I held 11. I mean, being cool wasn't it. It was the sacrifice that we did because of, and Dr. Martin Luther King said, if there is no sacrifice in what you do, then why you do it? There is redemption in your sacrificial belief. So don't stand and not be willing to sacrifice your life for something that is very plausible in the American society. If we were on top of the world doing it.
So John, you the tough gangster from Harlem, USA, and here you are on the victory stand, and as Ty described, it's this silent moment. Was fear a dominant part of your moment?
Never no fear, never fear. I felt like, they had threatened our lives prior to us going to Mexico, just based on the fact that we were talking about a potential boycott. My thoughts were, once you make the statement, whether I live or die, they can never take the statement away. It's there. I remember before we went out, I told Tommie, I said, Tommie, they've been threatening our lives. I said, remember, man, we are trained to listen to the gun.
Yeah.
I said, when we go out and we do what we do, everyone is going to be in shock. And that's exactly what Tommie and Ty are talking about in terms of that void. Everyone became deadly silence because they was in shock. They'd never seen anything like this. And I said to Tommie, if they're going to shoot, they're going to shoot in that void. Listen for the gun. We've been trained. Fortunately, God got us through that. I don't think I had any fear whatsoever. I did have thoughts in my mind about something that happened to me early in life in terms of a vision that's what that vision was all about, because here it is, what I experienced at 7 or 8 years old, here I'm live in the flesh and it's happening all over again. That's why I stated earlier that I think I was born June 5th, 45 to be in Mexico, October 16, 68.
So Cleve and Paul, Spencer mentioned the student protests that were taking place as you all arrived, and I think that, in addition to your story as the Harvard crew support, I think the student protest is the other undertold story of the moment.
This question about fear is really is fascinating to me, because the whole year was a fearful year, all of '68. Dr. King getting us.
In terms of people getting assassinated and all the bad.
It was clearly, it felt like one of these cataclysmic crises periods that the world has. It was like 1848 all over again. And I think, how we got to the Olympic project issue was out of this general, almost not fear, because sitting in Cambridge in 1968 was a pretty safe place to be. But this notion that, Dante said that in the darkest places in hell are reserved for those who in times of moral crisis seek to maintain their neutrality. We kept thinking, we've got to do something. Guys were getting drafted and going to a war that nobody supported. people were being beat over the head in political demonstrations. But we didn't have the personal fear. The idea of what Tommie and John did, which is referred to now as this iconic symbol of the moment, is true. It's like that, horrible photograph from the Vietnam War of the napalm girl, or the Robert Capa photograph in the Spanish Civil War of the soldier being shot with his rifle over his head, or St. Paul's Cathedral in the middle of the Blitz, standing there as everything around it is being destroyed. The difference is that all those other iconic images of moments in history were not the intended actions of the people being photographed. The guy didn't ask to get shot. The little girl sure in hell didn't ask to be napalmed. These guys made a conscious decision to take an action, and it was making it, not seeking to maintain your neutrality, seeking to speak. That was what was sort of ennobling about it. And actually, both of them have always been very kind in speaking about Peter Norman, who I would like to remember because he's passed on. But I was with Tommie and John's wives and a wonderful sports writer named Pete Axthelm in the stands. And Pete Axthelm was the guy who that summer had written 2 big Sports Illustrated cover stories about the revolt of the black athlete, and really took what Harry Edwards was talking about to an immensely wider audience. SI in those days was, ESPN, sort of alternative universe. And he and I like to watch track, so I was in the stadium with him and John and Tom's wives. And after they came up, everybody was leaning over the side to congratulate them. And Peter Norman, who was from Australia, Australia at the time had a policy that did not allow people of color to immigrate into the country. They had their own problems with the Aborigines, but they sure in hell weren't going to welcome somebody who looked like everybody else but Cleve and me on the stadium into that country. And he looks up at me, and I was wearing my Olympic Project Human Rights button on my USA tracksuit. And he says, "Hi, mate, you got another one of those buttons?" And I said, "You going to wear it?" Yeah. And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You going to wear it out there?" And I couldn't believe that a white Australian was asking me this question. And he said, "Yeah." I said, "No, I don't have another one. Take mine." But to your point of fear, unlike these guys who never got a hearing, the U.S. Olympic Committee was going to throw me off the team also for conspiring to aid a demonstration, which I knew nothing about until these guys showed up with their gloves and their socks. And that was the tension of fear on the team. And that was cross-cutting. And that was the same atmosphere. Pete Axthelm, who was, as I say, the sports editor rather, for Newsweek by the time the games came around. He left Sports Illustrated. When he got to Mexico, he didn't have a press credential. Now, it didn't take the Washington Post, which owned Newsweek, very long to get him one. But when he came in, the guy who was the public relations head for the United States Olympic Committee meets him at the stadium and says, "Oh, I see you got in. I hope you got something better to write about than N-word." That was the climate. It was that fear. I mean, these guys were just summarily marched out of town the next day. And so there was that specific to sports and specific to the organization of sport fear that I think even before the games was penetrating. I've tried to understand why, and when we were writing letters, it was sort of like dropping a rock on a well. We never heard a splash. Of the white folks on the team who I remember as being, at all involved in the OPHR, Hal Connolly, Olga Connolly, his wife, a guy named Tom Waddell, who later became known as the sort of founder of the Gay Olympics, who was a serving military officer. And when he got interviewed the day after your demonstration, on his way out to the track for the second day of the decathlon, some reporter asked him, "Don't you think they disgraced the flag?" And he said something, which, when it went through the sports writing law, was printed in the Washington paper as, I think what the flag has done in disgrace. I don't think they've disgraced the flag. I think that what's disgraceful is the treatment of black people in America. He got a cable from his commanding officer saying if there wasn't a written retraction of that statement within 24 hours, he'd be court-martialed. Because I remember writing a non-retraction for him. It's an early political writing. But that was the fear that was permeating, that there was no room for expression.
No, and I appreciate you taking the fear conversation a little bit further. I mean, one of my favorite quotes, John F. Kennedy in Profiles in Courage, sooner or later we'll all have the opportunity to be courageous. What will you do with that moment when it comes? Is what I think all of you have shown the positive steps you can take when you have that moment. And as you all described, sometimes even bits and pieces of what you guys did, you didn't have time to plan it. This is what we need to do in this moment. So Spencer, we're running up against the clock a little bit, but I do want to think about the Olympic Project for Human Rights and how it continued on even after the games. I mean, on your return, you know, after a bit of time, you bring this action against the National Basketball Association. And the ABA was there, but here's the place that could really feed you properly. So you bring a lawsuit essentially saying we should all have the opportunity to play when we're ready to go. How much did the activities of Mexico City and Olympic Project for Human Rights influence your decision to bring that action?
Profoundly, because, you know, what took place in Mexico City set me up for 2 years later. At the time when I sued the NBA and the NCAA for the rights to play professional basketball, I mean, it was the same as Tommie and John had did earlier, and the fear, but I had faith. So my mother would always say, your fear should be overcome by faith. And that was my whole point. So I thought perhaps that my story would propel the courts to say, you know, he has the right to play. And I thought I would win in maybe the first round of the court system. And it had to go all the way to the Supreme Court. They put me out in the snow during the season while I was getting protested. They threw bottles on the floor. They did a number of cruel things. In fact, the Chicago Bulls, the champion Chicago Bulls, later on, they sued me for $600,000 in 1970 for breaking, for even just being on the floor. So it was a courageous time, but I got all of my courage from Tommie and John because of what they did. And you know, when you do these things, you don't know why and what's going on, but you know that God is in total control. Now, I want to deviate for just a second, because when we were in the village and we were sitting around, us ball players, because we had a future, we was going to go out and play pro ball later on in life, we used to sit there and we was talking, you know, with what Tommie and John has done for America. We thought, and I know I did in my narrow opinion, that they would never have to want for anything financially in this world. I really sincerely thought that. I thought black folks would take care of them for the rest of their life. And I'm still disappointed because of that. So I had to get that out, because I really, as a young boy in Mississippi, you know, you're growing up, you think that you have to protect those who put it out there for you. You have to make sure they don't want for things. And I've just been so disappointed for that. And I've been disappointed by NBA players. Now, I look at my ruling, what it has made for the NBA. For the ownerships, when I fought this case, the owners, the teams were worth $250 million. Now they're worth $2 billion because of this ruling. And I look at the players like LeBron James, for an example. He has 4 extra years in the NBA at $43 million per year because of what I stood for. And so I have made over $5 billion for players in revenue. And so I wonder, when did this group of people stand up? Because I see Jim Brown at the White House, you know, sort of like asking for
Well, that's a whole nother panel. We're not.
No, I'm just saying.
And don't say Kanye, please. Don't.
No, I'm just saying. Why didn't Kanye give him $1 million not to go? You see? So I'm just kind of sending a wake-up call, because I'm the chairman of the board of the NBA retired players. Now, I must say that our young guys did a good deed for our guys, because I went to them and asked them that we need health insurance. And LeBron, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, Carmelo Anthony, and Dwayne Wade, they dropped $16 million on our players per year for health insurance. They don't talk about it, but I think that that's where we have to take care of the people who paved the way.
And I wanted to close with that, the continuing legacy of the Olympic Project for Human Rights and what all of you did. Sometimes we can't always see it. Yes. Sometimes we see it in the form of Kaepernick getting a Nike commercial, something that didn't happen back then. But there are, since you took us all the way down, I'll try to bring us up a little bit. Yeah. There are these moments of progress that have taken place because of the courage that you all displayed. And we've run up against the clock. We're going to take a 10-minute break before the next panel. But please join me in thanking these great human beings.
Job well done, Kenny. Job well done.
I want to thank all of the students who came in today. Some of you cut classes, I know, but hopefully you found it worth your time. This is your event. The statue that you see on the campus is there as a result of student effort. The Olympic Project for Human Rights was substantially a student effort. Student athletes were involved, but the student body and others were most certainly supportive, so I am tremendously grateful for you having come in today and attended this important event. The moderator of our second panel is Mr. Bill Rhoden, celebrated sports journalist, author, lecturer, and television sports commentator. Mr. Rhoden was a sports columnist at the New York Times from 1983 until his retirement in 2016. He was a contributor to the acclaimed TV sports programs, The Sports Reporters and Real Sports, and appeared on numerous sports networks as an analyst and commentator on sports and social issues in both the domestic and the international realms. Bill Rhoden is the author of The $40 Million Slaves, a searing analysis of the payoffs and pitfalls facing black athletes in the business and culture of American sports. He is currently writer at large for ESPN's Undefeated. Bill Rhoden graduated from Morgan State University in the 1970s and is the recipient of numerous awards, including a Peabody Award in 1996 for his writing on the HBO special, The Journey of the American Black Athlete. We are fortunate to have him as our panel moderator today. A major tenet of my 1981 Cornell University dissertation was that far from consisting of the Toy Department of Human Affairs, sport inevitably recapitulates society. One implication of this simple proposition is that inevitably human and institutional relationships in society and the ideologies that rationalize and justify those relationships unavoidably frame up and rationalize relationships in sport. So if we go back to what I have termed the first wave of sports activism, from the turn of the 20th century to World War II, sport in America was framed up by a situation of abject Jim Crow segregation, American apartheid. The ideology rationalizing and justifying that segregation, and also helping to frame up the relationships involved was that Negroes were irredeemably inferior, and therefore it was crystal clear that the goals of this segregation were not to spur parallel, separate, but equal alternative paths to Negro opportunity and development and achievement, but rather the goals of abject segregation were to create, enforce, and sustain Black circumstances as close to the subsistence, subjugation, and subservience of slavery as possible. Within this context, the Negro Leagues of Major League Baseball were elements of a resistance movement in sport, and as were the Washington, D.C. Bears and the Harlem Renaissance teams in professional basketball. And there were others, there were athletes who contributed individually to this resistance. Jack Johnson, Joe Louis, Jesse Owens, and Paul Robeson, along with Althea Gibson, all of whom had their greatest and most repeated successes in the international arena, beyond the stifling pressures of American apartheid. If we go back to that era, we see that Jack Johnson defeated Canadian Tommie Burns in Australia to become the first Black heavyweight champion of the world. Jesse Owens had his greatest athletic success and applause in the 1936 Munich Olympics. Joe Louis fought 52 professional fights before his name appeared in a headline on the sports pages of mainstream newspapers in America, and even then, he was denied the option of fighting at Madison Square Garden. He achieved his greatest recognition and applause in the international arena in 1938 with his rematch with Max Schmeling, then regarded as the Nazi icon and validation of Aryan superiority. Paul Robeson parlayed his athletic prowess into a singing career, most notably in Europe, where he appeared on stages before royalty long before he could appear on the stage at Carnegie Hall right here in his own country. In fact, despite demonstrable excellence as a singer during his student years at Rutgers University, he was never so much as invited to join the university glee club. Althea Gibson was a gifted athlete in two largely white sports in America, tennis and golf. She was the first Negro to cross the color line in international sports, and she was the first American to win a Grand Slam in the French Championships in 1956, at the very beginning of the civil rights movement. And the following year, she enhanced her international acclaim when she won a Wimbledon and was only then allowed to participate in the U.S. Nationals precursor to the U.S. Open, where she won a women's championship. She was ultimately inducted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame and the International Women's Sports Hall of Fame. This focus on sports achievement within the international arena was compelled by the fact and reality of abject racist segregation in America, which had the goal of stifling Negro opportunity and development. And there is also this implication of sports' inevitable recapitulation of society. When there is no evident active counter-ideology and movement in the broader society to frame up and project the legitimacy of any potential expression of resistance in sports, in the sports realm, that resistance is either substantially non-existent, misunderstood, miscast, misinterpreted, or ignored. I offer 3 cases in particular. The first is that of Wayne Collette and Vince Matthews, who demonstrated at the very end of the Black Power era in the 400-meter on the 400-meter victory stand in 1972. Few people remember that demonstration, even though, like Carlos and Smith, Wayne Collette and Vince Matthews were sent home along with the 2 other members of the 4x400 relay team, since there was no one to run with them. The second case I would call in your attention to is that of Craig Hodges of the NBA world champion Chicago Bulls, one of the greatest three-point shooters in the history of the game. But he had the audacity to go to the White House with an 8-page letter for President George H. Bush asking that the circumstances and outcomes of poor people, people of Native American heritage, and African Americans be put on the front burner in terms of a political concern. But in 1972, Hodges returned to the Bulls to successfully defend their successfully defend their NBA championship. After 1 game of the finals, Hodges opened up a trusted relationship with then New York Times sports writer, columnist Bill Rhoden, where he stated, "The poverty and racism in the city is so hellish. Just look across the street from Chicago Stadium where we play. We make millions of dollars, but how many lives in this community are changed as a result?" In July of 1992, a few weeks after the Bulls won their second championship, Craig Hodges got a call from the Bulls general manager. According to Hodges, the general manager said, "Thanks for looking after the young players on the team. We're going to have to let you go." And that was the end of his career. He never played in the NBA again. And then there's the case of Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, who was the Steph Curry of the NBA before Steph Curry. Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, formerly Chris Jackson, was one of the greatest shooters in NBA history. He sparked controversy when he refused to stand for the national anthem, pointing up the contradiction between singing "Land of the Free" with so many black people in particular, and as well as others, subject to poverty, oppression, and injustice. On March 12, 1996, he was suspended from the league for his refusal to stand during the national anthem. 2 days later, he was worked out a compromise with the NBA whereby he would stand during the anthem, but would close his eyes, look down while he recited an Islamic prayer for all of those who were suffering in America from all walks of life and from all races and ethnicities. Of course, it was not long before this great player, like Craig Hodges, was out of the NBA. The thing that Wayne Collette, Vince Matthews, Craig Hodges, and Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf share is that their protest occurred in a period 1972 to 2012, when there was a hiatus, a lack of broader ideological and political framing that would have supported their actions. In short, all of these protesting athletes were essentially left to stand alone. There was no Cleveland summit of the type that was there to support Muhammad Ali for Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. And in many quarters, even Black America was confused or simply ignored and ultimately forgot these great athletes. On our panel today to address these issues, moderated by famed sports columnist Bill Rhoden, are first the great Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf. Joining him on the panel is Dr. Demian Thomas. Dr. Thomas is a sports curator at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Having had the distinct privilege of working with him in developing the Leveling the Playing Field Sports Hall at the museum, I was and continue to be amazed at the levels of energy, insight, and dedication that he has committed from the outset to what he terms educating the world about developments at the interface of sport, race, and society. Dr. Thomas is on this panel as well today. Also on the panel is Dr. Keith Harrison. Dr. Harrison is an acclaimed academic, associate professor of business management at the University of Central Florida. He has long been an advocate of athlete development and innovative athlete support programs. He has over 2 decades of university research, teaching, administrative service experience at a number of schools and universities where he has taught. Harrison has published extensively in peer-reviewed scholarly professional journals and is co-author of the recently published book, Sports Business Analytics, Using Data to Increase Revenue and Improve Operational Efficiency. Dr. Harrison is also on the panel today. And last, but by no means least, Ms. Tommie Smith-Thompson. Ms. Smith-Thompson is affiliated with the New York Civil Liberties Union and is an organizer in the advocacy department, where her focus has been on support for campaigns to strengthen public education regarding social issues such as school suspensions, disparate arrest and incarceration rates, and the First Amendment rights to engage in protest. After sparking national debate herself in 2003 over her protest during the national anthem at a college basketball game, Tommie Smith-Thompson has established a career in the nonprofit sector addressing social justice issues through direct service, organizing, and advocacy for policy reform. She continues to be an outspoken activist around issues of equity, justice, and free speech. She is a graduate of Manhattanville College with a degree in sociology. Please welcome our moderator, Bill Roden, and our second panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I must say I'm quite honored, A, to be here helping to celebrate this 50th anniversary. I'm really honored to be in the presence of the 4 panelists, 3 of whom I knew and spoke with, covered, 1 of whom I heard about just through reputation, and it's been just really tremendous to talk to you about your experiences. I want to start with Demian. I don't know how many of you have been in Washington, D.C. and have had the opportunity to be at the National Museum of African American History and Culture. I'm just curious, how many people have actually been through there? Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's really phenomenal, really phenomenal. Demian, what I want to ask you first is when it was time for you to decide who gets in, who gets out, so like the Hall of Fame, how did you balance skill, great athletes because of skill, versus either activism or social significance?
Well, a couple of days before the museum opened, I looked at one of my colleagues and I said, you know, the sports gallery is not about sports. And they looked at me and they were a bit startled. And my point was that the sports gallery is about the larger African-American struggle for greater rights and freedoms through sports. And so what I try to do in the gallery is to both celebrate athletic accomplishments, but also to situate sports and athletic accomplishments in this larger context, to demonstrate that sports matter and they matter far beyond the playing field. And so in doing that, you also have to think about your visitors and what your visitor is going to expect to see. You know, people want to see Willie Mays. And so we talk about skill and you think about Jackie Robinson, but you also have to think about how their contributions matter, both in terms of the play, but also in terms of the larger cultural contribution. With Willie Mays, the fact that Willie Mays is someone who can be black on the baseball field matters. It's a different contribution than Jackie Robinson's contributions, which were about the political and social kind of issues that people are kind of confronting on their day-to-day lives. And so we try to do both. We don't want to take the fun out of sports, but we also really need to think about these larger contexts as well.
Just sort of following up, Colin Kaepernick, do you have, I think you've been sent some stuff, Kaepernick, and just to show you, I guess, how quickly all this changes from 2016, when maybe you got the first contribution of Kaepernick's jersey, something like that, to now, he's almost become iconic. So again, I guess you have some, where does a guy like Kaepernick fit in? Because it's living, ongoing, rapid fire history.
And that's something that you always have to think about. You always have to think about, is this something that matters today? Will it matter 20 years? Will it matter 50 years from now? And it's something that you have to balance. Certainly, I heard someone say recently, is Colin Kaepernick the Rosa Parks of our generation? And it's yet to be decided. It really depends on what happens. If we see large-scale reform, if we see things changing in society, then maybe it rises to that level. But certainly it's incredibly important for today and for the future. But the full significance of it is still yet to be decided.
Yeah. Keith, I want to go to Keith, Mahmoud, and then Tony. You were born in 1968.
Yes, sir.
Which is sobering for all of us. Trust me, it gets more sobering as we But you were born in 1968. When did you, which was a pivotal year for those of us who are kind of old heads, that was like, you know, Rome was burning. Talk to me about your evolution, being born in 68, and then as you got older and became an academic, and you were like, oh my God, 68 was, how did we ever survive that? But just, what was your evolution like?
I don't have any evidence, but I think while I was in my mother and father's arms, I must have been watching all this play out that inspired me. I often joke, but you know, I'm the descendant of two parents that grew up in segregated Texas, Maxine and Claude. They just recently celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary, and so I've been reflecting on how I grew up. My whole life, they've raised my consciousness. So if you fast forward from 68 to 1991, my dad said, come sit down, watch 60 Minutes with me. And on 60 Minutes was Dr. Edwards, and he was talking about hypocrisy of higher education and sport. I was never the same after seeing Dr. Edwards. So I'm a former college football player. I went on to get my doctorate, and the activism for me has been to try to mentor students, colleagues, peers, like Dr. Akilah Carter, Dr. Vernon Andrews, and trying, as Dr. Edwards said, to get people to use sports intelligently. And so in academia, there are not many that study sport that are people of color or from ethnic minority groups. And so what I tried to do with that is make sure that our voices are heard within the literature. On the activism point, and the president alluded to this earlier, I think it's real important that we increase student engagement. So in a week from today, it's not my class, it's my adjunct's class, Dr. Jeff O'Brien, we're taking 54 students to go see The Hate U Give. And I think it's important that we do those types of things because you don't often get 54 people with 54 different points of views watching one issue. And we know racial profiling is still a serious issue. So throughout my career at Washington State, University of Michigan, Arizona State, now UCF, go Knights.
Okay.
I had to give a plug.
43, I was wondering what we got.
Since the polls won't move us up. But no, I've just had a great time, and I think the way I want to close my remarks for now is how things come full circle. So you think Dr. Edwards has mentored me over the years. I've used the documentary, The Journey of the African American Athlete. If you haven't, how many have seen it? Just curious. Okay. Bill wrote it. Demian and I, Dr. Thomas, we met in, I think, 2004. We're both from LA. I hadn't met Tony, but respect the things she's done. And then last but not least, in 1996, when I was at Washington State, an All-American football player and graduate of Washington State, Leon Bender did his term paper on Mahmoud. And so things have a way of coming around.
How long, well, I'm going to get back to, so I'm curious. We'll get to that because I want to ask each of you when sort of the light bulb went off. Because we grow up, we play sports, fun and games, and at some point in our lives, we realize this is not fun and games, it's a business. Mahmoud, again, I can't tell you how proud I am of you, actually. As you get older in this business, you start to, first you just cover people, and the people are older than you. Then, as you get older, they're the same age. Then you start covering people's sons. But in your case, it's been this wonderful evolution from being highly recruited, coming from Gulfport, Mississippi, going to LSU, studying all time. I mean, trust me, Dr. Edwards talked about Seth Curry and Mahmoud, but seriously, if you've ever seen him play or Googled him, it's the real deal. I mean, he was Curry plus before Curry. And one of the nicest people you would ever want to meet. So you went to the NBA after your second year, and then in 1995, we didn't know, but in 1995, first of all, you embraced Islam, changed your name. Then in 1995, you began your own silent protest during the national anthem. Why don't you take people, there are a lot of people who may not know, but just tell people what you did, how long you got away with it, and then what happened when people, when people found out.
Thank you. Obviously, there's always a genesis to what we do. There are a lot of subtle influences and immediate influences in your life that shapes, a lot of people that came up earlier, a lot of the participants were talking about their upbringing. And I think your environment has a way of molding and shaping, who you become, the information that you come into contact with. And of course, I can mention my mother, I can mention my grandmother, my aunt, my uncle, who pretty much instilled in me the value of not just to pray, but pray for others more than yourself. I was that little kid that at 12 o'clock midnight, I would always find myself watching images of people that were doing worse than myself, and I would find myself in tears and always questioning, what can I do? And you're fortunate to come across people in your life that continue to, in a sense, amplify those thoughts. And while I was at LSU, because you mentioned something about my embracing Islam, I had a lot of questions, but when I was at LSU, Dale Brown gave me the autobiography of Malcolm. And at that point, I'd never heard of Malcolm. And I was growing up going through an identity crisis. You wouldn't have known it looking at all the things I was doing on the basketball court and how we present ourselves or project ourselves. But I had a lot of insecurities when it came to education, when it came to where I viewed myself in terms of intellectually. I didn't see myself as having a future in that. I was that person that sat in the back of the class, look, don't ask me nothing. I don't want to answer questions. Then growing up with Tourette syndrome, and just that whole environment. And after reading about Malcolm's story, I ended up accepting Islam. But the book that changed it for me, you listen to people, read books, and even as a Muslim, you read the Quran, and there's a lot of wisdom. But you never know where that spark is going to come from. And it was after I read the book, The Prince of Slaves. And I began to read it about this king in Timbuktu, had a son named Abdul-Rauf who was enslaved in Natchez, Mississippi, about 2.5 hours away. And I started to reflect at that moment. And this happened when I was in the NBA. I started to reflect on my childhood and why do you see yourself the way you see yourself? And I remember after scoring 53 points in Florida, I was on the bus after that game, literally I'm crying like, my mother had just passed away. Not because I was happy, because I was scared, because I was saying, this don't happen to people like me. But that book had me looking into Timbuktu. And then you start researching the history of what they had, how books was the #1 commodity, right? How they had a judicial system, how they had universities. When we were coming up in that age where if you white, you're all right.
That's
If you
right,
yellow,
right.
you're a good fellow. You brown, get down, right? Looking at, right, and even watching television shows like Sanford and Son and Good Times, and every time it seemed like they were about to make it out, something would happen to kick them right back in, right? And so I'm analyzing all of this, like, where is this coming from? And it dawned on me that, and that's why I always talk about how your environment has a way of molding and shaping you, the things that you see that are constantly telling stories about you. And I think, you know, and for me, that's the trigger. I said, you know what, I don't want to live this life. I have to educate myself. I have to be aware of what I receive, the stories that I hear, the stories that are being told to me. And one thing led to another. And I ended up taking a position because I started coming across a lot of people. And I'm reading stuff I had never heard of. Arundhati Roy, Noam Chomsky, Gore Vidal, Randall Robinson, and I'm coming across stuff I'd never heard before. And I knew that I had to, there's no such thing as being neutral. And I knew that I had to take a position because I felt that if, once my life is over, and I'm gonna end with this, if all that people can remember me for is, oh, he had a mean crossover, or he had an amazing jump shot, I had a wasted life. And I don't want that to be my story.
Were you surprised, and this is the same question for you, Tommie, but both of you, I want you to answer this, but then I want you to tell us your story. Were you surprised by the ferocity of pushback? And I even think of today's NBA, people, when everything seems kind of hunky-dory and cute and there's a little picnic, until you bite the hand that literally feeds you. And I wonder for both of you, start first, were you surprised after people began seeing that you were actually protesting during the playing of the national anthem? Were you surprised by what happened to you afterwards, when basically the beast kind of came after you?
Yes and no. Yes, because we live in a society where we constantly articulate or talk about this freedom that we have of speech, and this freedom of religion. And even as an athlete, for example, I think it's a major contradiction. There's this sense of separation of politics and sports. Right. But the fact that we're forced, in a sense, to stand for a flag that has political significance. The song is political. Your gesture is political. But yet when we stand up for something outside of that, it's not accepted. And so in that sense, you're kind of surprised because, too, these are things we deal with, talk about all the time. Like on the bus, on the plane, professional athletes, we have these conversations. So me talking to a journalist, it was just normal, right? But you're not surprised because ignorance still exists and people have their prejudices. And it comes out, people have their agendas. But you can't allow that to dictate your decision. That's just my humble opinion.
Tony, again, you're a hero, really, and courage quadruple. Take us through what you did. 2003, you're playing at Manhattanville College. You're a guard. You're a senior. United States is getting ready to go into Iraq. Take us through that. You decided, again, almost like Mahmoud, you sort of, during the playing of the national anthem, turn your body, and it took a minute for people to kind of catch on. But what led you, again, to that point? You've been 4 years, 3 years, 4 years. Tell us what happened, why you did it, and what was the pushback?
Well, I grew up in a family of activists, so I was aware from a very young age that there was a contradiction between the America that we espouse and the America in practice. And so I grew up marching for with teachers unions, and there was always talk about Paul Robeson and Angela Davis and political parties, but in my house, they would just talk about party this and party that, and as a kid, I'm like, where's the party? Where's the balloon? So for many years, I didn't know what a party was, but I knew that there was something in the air, and I knew that, that injustice was real. My mom is white, my dad is black, and I'm the lightest of all my siblings and cousins, and so I was always really confronted with the way that my experiences in this country vastly different in many ways from that of my siblings, even walking with them, you know. And getting to college was the first time that I ever was in an institution where I had to stand for the national anthem or Pledge of Allegiance in order to participate in the activity that I was there to do. And so it was always out of place for me. But for the first 3 years that I was in college, I participated, just letting the time go by. And I thought that it was a neutral act. I thought that, it doesn't harm that I'm participating, even though I know that I don't believe in this. I know that this anthem I have no affinity for it. It's actually in contradiction with how I was raised and my own values. And it was really the result of a single conversation at the beginning of my senior year with my boyfriend at the time. And he said, well, you don't actually believe in this, so why do you do it? And I was like, oh, well, I'm the team captain, and I need to set a good example. But in the course of that conversation, distinguishing that my participation was not in fact neutral, like Mahmoud just said, and I always talk about how there's no such thing as neutrality, that my participation actually I was lending myself to this really toxic form of nationalism that was taking hold or was continuing, and that it was actually continuing the country on a path that was starkly in contrast to the one that I wanted to see. And as a student who was majoring in sociology, I had joined the social action student group on campus, and I was really coming into my own activism and telling myself, I'm an activist, I really believe in justice, I really want Black liberation. That was the first test for me, to actually act in accordance with who I said I was. And the moment that I distinguished that I was participating in an act that was in contradiction with that, to then not act and discontinue that participation, I felt like would have been so much more detrimental to my identity and my sense of purpose. It's because there was no next time. It wasn't like, oh, I'll protest next time. I'll just stand for the anthem and then I'll go to the next protest. There was no next time, because if I couldn't do this now, thinking about what folks before me had done to fight for freedom, justice, liberation, if I couldn't do this, then who was I?
And I remember one of my colleagues at the time wrote about it, and I think here's this, and this kind of has all four of you, because you're part of a generation. We just heard from panel 68. And in 68, there was the Black Power movement, there was radicalism, black, white, and indifferent. In your generation, and you all are basically around the same age, you were kind of in the wilderness. There was no big support network at all for you, certainly not for you. What was, again, the pushback like? There were, I think, a Vietnam vet confronted you on the court. You went to another game, people were catcalls and booing. I could think, wow, this poor woman, who was there for you, and what was that like?
I mean, at the time, there was a growing anti-war movement, and so my protest was largely billed as an anti-war protest, which I was certainly in opposition to the war, but it was so much more than that. It was very similar to what Mahmoud says, what Colin Kaepernick says, which is like highlighting this hypocrisy between who we say we are and who we actually are. And so that's really what was driving it. And you're right, like your question about whether I expected the response that I got. In contrast to the previous panel where John and Tanya talked about like that moment, like I made it to the podium, so now I can have this moment. There was no moment like that for me because I'm at a Division III college. We have like 5 fans at every game. There's no, like your friends don't even come to the game. So there's no reason to expect that this would get any attention beyond the immediate court. And in fact, my family didn't even know I was protesting until the story broke because they were driving up from New York City and they would get to the game late every day. And so, I was like, oh, by the way, like I'm doing this thing, and people are kind of mad about it. And so it really was just, I think it was a perfect storm of the moment that we were in, the fact that patriotism, nationalism was at an all-time high, and dissent was really, in terms of athletes, dissent was really non-existent. Like there was no room in the air to not participate in displays of patriotism because it was really us versus them. It was this country versus anyone else. And so had it not been for that moment, perhaps the story would have never broken and nobody would have known. But Mahmoud is right, it all has to do with like the context in the moment and your surroundings.
In your generation, and Keith, I wanted to, you were the 68 baby. what is, and I think as we get older, we ask, you know, guys, well, what's there to be angry about? What's the source of mission for each of you? A mission for you as an academician, a mission for you in the museum, a mission for you now you're with the ACLU, a mission for you. What's the ongoing mission? Because the interesting thing, well, that's the first, what's the ongoing mission? And we don't have to go in order, but what's the ongoing mission in your generation?
I'm just going to start with, most of my life I've dedicated to the issue of stereotypes of athletes. I'll just use a recent example to me that made me angry is, and I was actually cheering for the Patriots, but someone from the Chiefs scored, I think Tyreek Hill, this past Sunday.
Wait a minute, you said you were cheering for the Patriots.
I was. I played center, and their logo used to be a center. It's a weird story. So he scores, and then the fans are flipping him the bird, and then a gentleman throws beer on him. How many saw this? Yeah. So it bothers me on so many levels. To quote Jalen Rose, he said, you know, African American, specifically male athletes, we're not zoo animals. And so one of the things I enjoy about activism is it humanizes athletes, because people do not understand their lives beyond just playing ball. I mean, what would make a fan think that they could just throw beer on it? The positive of that is, if you look online, a lot of Patriots fans are like, never allow him in the game. So be specific with your question, Bill. Unfortunately, too many student athletes or college athletes or youth or pro perpetuate stereotypes about themselves for different reasons. So what I've tried to do is mentor and teach myself, how do I broaden the identities of these athletes so they can use their platform to make society better and not just ball out and buy stuff and be hyper material and those things.
Damian, I want to hear you, but isn't that a tough sell? I mean, I'm sure you're now at a football factory now. You got to officially become a football factory. And you have everybody want to go to the league. How difficult is it to do everything, the very noble things you're trying to do, when you've got a group of particularly young brothers trying to get to the league, and that's pretty much where they want to go, and how are you going to help them get there?
You have to hit them with facts. I mean, the NFL stands for not for long. I mean, across the major sports, the average career is less than 5 years. And so when I speak to big time programs over the years, I ask the questions, and the players usually sit up in their seats. I said, on this question, I said, do you all understand why NFL specifically, the average career is less than 4 years? And they don't know why. I say, it's structural. If it's more than 4 years, they have to pay you a pension. And that's not a good business model, not only for the NFL in their view or other leagues. So they don't even understand structurally that most of them, if they get the opportunity to play professionally, they're going to be done before they're 30. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? I would like to see more former athletes in the classroom, in business and law, because I think we've missed something. If you go back to Dr. Edwards, who was on the island pretty much by himself doing sports sociology. Now we've come behind him, and we can ask some questions that get overlooked.
You were making a lot.
Sure. If I go back and think about to my sort of formative years in the 80s and 90s, I think the retrenchment that took place during the Reagan era, the ways that Reagan was able to roll back so many of the advancements of the civil rights movement left so many of my peers feeling powerless. I remember for a long time talking to people and people saying, marching, protesting doesn't matter. It doesn't work. It's not a viable means of social transformation. Even before coming to the museum, I was a college professor teaching classes on sports and social justice and things like that. And my students would continue to say things like that to me. And I had to remind them that we were in the midst, and I would say it this way. So do you realize that we are in the midst of one of the most profound social revolutions in the history of the world? And they would look at me with these blank faces. And then I would talk about what the LGBT community has done in the last 30 years is unprecedented in world history. And so I think my generation for a long time just felt as if they were powerless. And they weren't, and I get why they thought that way, but just couldn't see how being socially engaged could be transformative.
I'd like to mention, you said earlier something about what is there to be angry about. I think you just mentioned. I think you can take your pick. No, seriously, every panelist, even before, everybody, for the most part, has mentioned something about their upbringing, and I'm big with that. And I really think that, especially for me, I look at when you grow up in certain economic situations and social conditions, and you know what it looks like not to have, you know what it looks like to be discriminated against, how can you not be angry? Anger is something, I had my old coach, Dale Brown, once we were in a dialogue, and I didn't know, he kept sending me a lot of stuff that I thought was like anti-Islamic. I pick your battles, Mahmoud, don't address everything. So one day I ended up responding, and we went back and forth, and he said, you act like an angry black man. And I said, you act like anger is something bad. God gave it to us. If it wasn't for anger, we wouldn't defend ourselves. So we were going back and forth. Make a long story, I said, this Dale Brown, the coach at LSU? He said, yes. I didn't know that was who it was. But when you grow up in those conditions, I think it's natural for human beings that we are naturally attracted to beautiful things. We're naturally repulsed by unpleasant things. I think, when you see an injustice, whatever it is or whoever it's targeted toward, if you don't feel that, this society has a way of, desensitizing you. Like nowadays, you hear somebody die. Oh man, my heart goes out to you, man. I hope everything is good. So we're going to shoot pool later? We don't think about the consequences of what that means, that life was lost, how it's going to affect the parent, the father, the brother, the daughter, what this means, economically for that family. We don't think that deep. And some of us do. So for me, I think about a lot of these people that came before us, even the panelists before, all the people that spend years and years investigating these complex issues. I mentioned a lot the Arundhati Roys and all of that. And those are the type of things for me. I'm constantly reading and trying to stay, focused, stay grounded, because there's a tendency, the society that we live in, to pull us away. We talked about that earlier. We get comfortable in our position, and we lose that fight. And I don't ever want to lose that. Huey P. Newton in his book, Revolutionary Suicide, has a quote. I could have stopped reading his book after I read it. And he was talking about the difference between revolutionary suicide and reactionary suicide. And revolutionary suicide, giving your life for a cause. He said it's not that we have a death wish, but it's just the opposite. It's that we have such a strong desire to live with peace and dignity that the existence without it is impossible. And for me, it's like, man, that's we don't never want to lose that.
Isn't that a reality, though? We talked about this, too. Isn't it reality? Can you work from the inside and be outside simultaneously? I think sometimes, we talked about that. Well, can you be, we kind of delude ourselves. We work on these huge corporations. Well, I could be inside and outside at the same time. I don't know. I don't know if you had the time to sleep on. Can you be inside? You're with the ACLU, so you probably are closer to being on the outside than it was. But is it possible to be sort of a radical within the context of basically a corporation system that basically is maintaining the status quo?
Well, I think you need to do both. I think when we think about social movements of the past, there's always been two elements. And working at the ACLU, we're often working within systems and then we're working outside of systems. What I think is important is that those two strategies work in tandem and not in conflict. And so not to say protest is invalid, we need to stop protesting and instead go sit at the table with the owners or sit at the table with folks who have power. That alone is not going to do it because they're not going to listen unless people are out in the streets demanding a change, right? Power concedes nothing. So it's both. I think it's a very hard line to straddle for one person to be both inside and outside, and it's a balance that I think most people become very uncomfortable to do because it weighs on you. Most people either totally check out or you just kind of give in and like, I'm with the system, like I'm just going to play the game. And so doing both requires constant renegotiation about where you're going, who are your values, who are you following, who are you aligning with. And then just to answer your other question, which is related, which is what drives me in this, is my protest was the first time that I distinguished the difference between having a right and having an access to a right. And it was really interesting to hear people say, you shouldn't protest the national anthem or the flag because that's what gives you that right to do it. And then the counter side was, well, because it gives you that right, then you should do it. And so I really started to think about this notion of having rights being only like in this glass case where you can't touch it. And then what good is it if it's out there? And so now working at the ACLU, we come up against that a lot with people having rights, black folks on the street with police, right? And then what does that actually look like in the lived experience? What does it look like on the street? And being able to acknowledge that there's a gap there. There's a conflict between the rights we say we have and what actually happens on the street. And so what drives me is constantly being able to make people aware of that gap, having people know what to do if you're not being able to access a right, what do you need to do if somebody else can't access their rights, and how do you organize to bridge that gap?
You know, one thing, speaking of history, I had a conversation with a middle school, you know, and we talked about, it was Black History Month, of course, you know. And so at the end of it, she said, yeah, Mr. Roden, that's all well and good, but who was the first, who was the first white player to integrate the NBA? I said, who was the first white player to integrate the NBA? And I had the same reaction. I said, damn, man, we got a long way to go. But I guess my question to each of you is that when you think about it, it all makes sense. Because for people maybe in your generation below, they grew up at a time when, you know, NBA was 68% black or whatever, the NFL was, it was all black. There was never a sense of fighting and struggling and all that. So I'm wondering, how do you, in each of your fields, you're dealing with, you know, again, factory, that's a stereotype, but you're dealing with guys who want to go to the league. You're in a place where you're supposed to preach history. Each of you are dealing with young people. You speak, you lecture. How do you now reach a younger generation to kind of radicalize them to understand that, listen, this is the struggle is never over. How do you reach that, preach that to a younger generation, which in large part is fairly well off?
I'll start, and it goes back to actually my very first day of class as a college freshman. I was in a colonial U.S. history class, and this is what the professor said. He said, whoever controls the present will use their power to control the past in hopes of controlling the future. One more time. Whoever controls the present will use their power to control the past in hopes of controlling the future. And that was transformative for me because I learned two things. Number one, that history is power. That history is the power to define why things matter. And the way history has traditionally been used is to make our present moment seem as if it's natural, it's inevitable, there was no other way, and this was just the only way. So the ability to kind of take history and to counteract those narratives and those myths is really important. And I see that as the core of my mission. The second thing that I realized is that history is actually not about the past. It's about the future. And if you can craft a history that makes black people think that all throughout history, blackness has been denigrated and it's somehow normal to have racism, you can control how people respond to it. You can convince women that women have always been in the home and always been subjugated. You can control them. And so we have to use history in order to craft a better future.
One of the reasons I stay in academia, and particularly at my institution where we grant a lot of Latino and African American bachelor's degrees, is that it's an interracial dialogue. We have a lot of diversity. And so what I try to do, Bill, through once again, the journey of the African American athlete, we start at the beginning. societal policies, Plessy versus Ferguson. The first thing that pops up are the African-American jockeys. And the students are like, you know, we just thought it was football and basketball. Well, we know historically Major Taylor dominated cycling. Now he's in the Hennessy commercial with Nas narrating it. That's right. How history changes. Basketball was the least sport. And when they interviewed the Renaissance group, they're talking about playing defense, which defense isn't always the priority. But when you go through that history, you also see people like Paul Robeson that inspired me in grad school. They were scholar athletes, or what I call scholar ballers. The first African-American, all-American academically and athletically is William Henry Lewis, played center at Harvard and Amherst. He created the neutral zone. I didn't find out about that until grad school. I'm like, man, I wish I had known that when I played center, that a brother, quote unquote, had these contributions. So I always go back to, in 1997, Sports Illustrated put on the cover, and this was total racial propaganda. They put, what happened to the white athlete? Well, I quote Dr. Edwards, this notion that blacks dominate sports, let's critique that. Are we talking about sport leadership? Are we talking about participation? Dr. Edwards, in our quote, said if blacks dominated sports, we wouldn't see whites and other groups at all. So we have this notion that blacks dominate sports. And to me, domination would mean ownership. And there's very little ownership.
So I was talking to a class of fifth graders about my protest and athlete activism, and halfway through, a fifth grader asked a question. She said, "What was happening in the country at the time?" And I realized I hadn't said anything about 9/11. I hadn't said anything about what that time was. And in that moment, I got, oh, what I'm doing right now is like teaching about the civil rights movement or teaching about Martin Luther King Jr. without grounding it in the civil rights movement, right? Like devoid of all context. And so when you talk about the importance of history being necessary to control the future, I think about that a lot. And, you know, in the work that I do, it's a lot on education policy, and we are, in New York City, 97% of the students who have to walk through metal detectors at the high school age are black and brown. They know something is wrong. They know that something is not equal. They know that when they look across the street at the school that doesn't have metal detectors, where the student population is mostly white, they know there's some reason why that's happening. As a college student, a high school student, I know for many of these students, you feel that something is off, but you don't have the language or the framework or the knowledge of like the levels of power in order to be able to make sense of and articulate what it is you're experiencing. And the inability to articulate an injustice happening to you is deadly. And so one of the things that grounds me in this and keeps me going is how necessary it is for young people to understand and ground what they're experiencing inside of the interpersonal interactions they're having, the institutional interactions, systemic structural levels of power, so that they can begin to articulate their own experiences so that they can have the power to dismantle them.
I'm just grabbing the mic because it looks good. Because after all of what they said, I'm tapping out. But no. Let me say, I think the common thread is, there's history, there's information being informed. And she just said something that made me think of, because before I didn't have anything to say, because they did such a wonderful job. But, there's a saying, because she talked about understanding, talked about history, talked about education. But I think it's hard unless you put yourself, you can talk about it all day long, but unless people that are well off know what it feels like not to be well off, right? To go get your hands dirty, to be in those situations. There's a saying that you can never be patient with that which is beyond the scope of your experience. So unless you experience it, you're never truly gonna understand it. That's just me. So I think that's something that we have to consider.
Hey, let me ask you something. Now, we're going to go completely off script. I'm going to ask you something that has nothing to do with anything. But this stuff that we're probably not going to be together. Again, a couple of things I'm curious about. One is I want to ask everybody about the Nike commercial, because it's almost like, to me, in an era where money has become the highest value of our society, where the triumph of mammon has become the highest value. I'm looking at everything through a level of cynicism. You can't take everything for face value. Well, let's start there. Everybody saw the Nike ad, right? Everybody saw the Nike ad, the great Nike ad with Colin and all that. What y'all think? I mean, would you get hook, line, and sinker? Great thing. With cynicism, let's kind of go down the murderer's row here. I'm curious to find out what y'all thought about that. Did y'all run out of your shoes, or get a necklace, or like, you know? Hope this is a sponsor, but is this
No. It's okay, it's okay. You know, I've been asked about that question too, and one of the first things that came to my mind when I saw that is, you know, I think Colin should be celebrated constantly for what he not only has done but continues to do. But also I think there's a tendency, right? When you look at corporations like that, I'm skeptical. Sometimes those type of things can have a tendency to soften you up if you're not careful. You know, I think there's a political analyst called Richard Itten, and he said he cautions against viewing resistance as inherently revolutionary because once it becomes accepted, it's easily anticipated by the dominant authorities and therefore easily folded into their hegemonic understanding of things. So when you see athletes, it's easy for them to put on, you know, you're allowing them the platform to put on I Can't Breathe shirts, giving them this platform. You know, when it becomes fashionable, right, it kind of loses its force and its thrust. And so you gotta, she talked about constantly negotiating. You gotta constantly be leery of that because you're in certain arenas now, different arenas. There's something that triggered you taking that position. Right. Now when you, and they've done studies, if you're not in shape, you want to get in shape, hang around somebody who's in shape. If you're not smart, hang around somebody that's smarter. There's a tendency you're going to be smart. There's a lifestyle, there's a language associated with that. So if you want to constantly be an activist, right, be political, be moral, you need to kind of stay connected with that. So that was one of my concerns when I first heard it.
Yeah, the Nike commercial. When I first saw the commercial, my social media feeds were filled with everyone else's commentary before I had seen it, and they were all glowing. And so I had a certain expectation for what the ad was going to be. And when I saw it, the first thing I asked myself was, what is this commercial selling? What is this ad selling? And the part of, in the long form of the ad, the part that really stuck out to me was there was an image of Colin with the flag behind him. And I said, well, that's not an accident. What does that mean? So really beginning to analyze, what is this commercial selling? And, you know, the revolution will not be televised, nor will it be led by Nike, right? Like, that's just not going to happen, and we should not think that that's who the vehicle is going to be. So I don't think there's anything with the ad for what it is. I just think we need to be really clear about what it is and what it's selling us. It's not selling activism. It's not selling challenging systems of power. It's selling inspiration. It's selling that you can go beyond your personal limitations. You can defy expectations that people have of you. That's great. We should do that. But that is not the same as challenging systems of power. And it's also not threatening the way the initial act of protest was threatening to the system. And so, like, I applauded. I think it was beautifully done. I thought the athletes that they included in it were really well represented. But I also noticed that Colin was the only athlete in that ad whose act that they were being positioned in the ad for was not included in the ad itself. So him protesting wasn't actually in that ad. But everyone else's act, LeBron's school, Serena being a mom, like those were all specifically placed in there so you could see why they were included in there. And he actually wasn't. And so I picked up on all of those things. And I just think we just need to keep questioning when corporations get involved in activism and activism becomes profitable, what then becomes the message, and is it the message that we started out with?
We're going to see that ad in the museum?
Will you see that ad in the museum? But you will see Nike. Nike is in the museum. Nike is a $2 million donor to the museum, and they helped name the basketball winner. Full disclosure. But in terms of thinking about these sort of relationships and partnerships with corporations and athletes and others, I think in terms of messaging and how do you communicate your message as an athlete, sometimes you have to think about the partners that are available to you.
Yeah, okay.
And you have to develop partnerships not only with people who are 100% in line with you, but sometimes you have to make partnerships with people that will allow you to articulate part of your ideas and your understanding. And so in terms of thinking about what the ad represents and how it's being used in Colin's decision to continue to be partnered with Nike, I understand some of the ways that you have to make compromises in terms of pushing your messages forward.
Well, that's another panel for another day, if you have to. What do you think?
I just had two thoughts. One is, I liked it. Frankly, I thought the way people were in an uproar about it, I thought he was going to be burning the flag in it, or like after I saw it, and I'm from where the Williams sisters grew up, I was kind of like, I was like Tony, I was inspired. It wasn't about protest. And my second point is, I want to get in a focus group some of the people, or many of the people that are burning Nike stuff. So what is it? Is it that you all don't even want to see Kaepernick's face ever again? Is it like, why are y'all burning Nike stuff? The commercial, what is making you uncomfortable? I want to have that dialogue with them, because I just didn't see where the commercial, what is it threatening? I was inspired by certain aspects of it. So.
Especially when most of Nike's political dollars goes to Republicans.
Yeah, by the way, let me, was that for the donations or whatever? Just last thing, winding down, I want each of you sort of to leave us with something, but I had two questions. The USOC has never apologized to Tommie Smith and John Collins. They've never given them an apology. Has the NBA ever apologized to you? Because you lost, we can talk about how, but you lost at least 5 years of your playing career. Has the NBA ever apologized?
I'm still playing, man.
I know you're playing. You're still playing. I
can still get up. No, I'm just.
Yeah.
I'm just joking.
Okay.
Have they ever apologized? No, I don't. I don't ever. Part of me care and a part of me don't care. It's like when I'm asked the question, why haven't LSU retired your jersey? Right? A part of me don't care because for me, the way I think, and I'm a religious man, I'm not perfect, but that's not going to be something that I can take on the day of judgment and say, God, I averaged 30-something a game. Let me in. I can care less about that. But in reference to our history, oftentimes being distorted in a race, that's a part of that, right? I care about that. And so even with the NBA, if you have all of these ads, the NBA cares, and all of these things being pushed, and you're asking athletes to take positions on things that matter to you, but when certain athletes take positions, and this is not something that's wrong. What Kaepernick did, he didn't say anything wrong. Racial inequality exists. Police brutality exists, but he's condemned for it. No, they should have stood up for him, just like the NBA should stand up for people. So you don't have to give me an apology. Just do something so this don't happen again, but I wouldn't hold my breath on it.
That's great. Mahmoud, Tony, Demian, Keith, thank you very much. This is great, and we continue in the back, but thank you very much. This is great. This is great. Really good. You guys are great.
The moderator for our last panel is Dr. Maureen Smith. Dr. Smith is professor of kinesiology at Sacramento State University with research interest in historical and contemporary issues of race and gender in sport, the Olympic movement, and the social construction of race and ethnicity. Post-World War II African-American sports experiences is also an area of her interest, and sports and popular culture. Professor Smith is president-elect of the North American Society for history and has served as co-editor of the Bulletin of the International Society for the History of Physical Education and Sports. In 2014, Dr. Smith was inducted into the National Academy of Kinesiology, an honor bestowed only upon the best, brightest, and most productive among teachers and practitioners in the field. Professor Smith is co-author of the book, Representing Wilma Rudolph. Panel 3 is one that focuses principally on the media. A major challenge in the age of the internet and social media is the problem of the changing role and responsibilities of the traditional media. Under the circumstances where a 24/7 news cycle has made yesterday's headlines increasingly less relevant to the focus of interest today at an increasing rate, where history is what happened this morning, the logistics of simply printing and delivering a newspaper story or producing a broadcast and broadcasting a TV news story could mean disseminating a story that is no longer viewed as relevant or that is off the mark or outright wrong in terms of its focus because of the very speed of developments in the age of the social media and the internet. Dealing with the speed, complexities, and competing channels of information looms as the mass communications challenge of the first half of the 21st century. And so far, no one has figured out how to effectively manage the issues involved here. Not the traditional news and information media, not the online media platforms such as Facebook, Google, and numerous others, and most certainly not the public has figured out how to even sort out all of the various news sources and types of news that they are privy to today. More access to information than any generation in history, and we have an increasingly growing problem of how to manage it. Sports, of course, recapitulates all of these issues. How would the sports media cover the advent of an incident involving an injured football player whose simple act of taking a knee in protest of injustices beyond the arena goes viral over the social media? One player, one act that garners 2 million hits in the social media and 250,000 negative responses creates a problem of magnified scale relative to the fact that we are still talking about one player, not a broad-scale movement. And what of official responses? The league, the police departments, veterans organizations often, the President and Vice President of the United States, are they responding to one player or to what eventually became the fraction of 1% of the 1,700 players in the NFL who are protesting, or to the social media's magnified scale of this incident involving the less than 1% of players? The extent to which it is the latter rather than the former is indicated by how easily and often even foreign interests are able to inflame, infiltrate the debate and discourse between protesters and their supporters and anti-protest group interest. And sports is even more directly threatened. The old notion that what happens in a locker room stays in a locker room no longer holds. Online sports gambling and the hacking of computer systems pose major challenges. It's only a matter of time before a team's computer is hacked on the day before a big game. Not that it would change the game because the players still have to play the game, but it could change the betting lines involved, and there's tremendous incentive for that to occur. And suppose a reporter is passed some hacked information about a player, a game, or a locker room situation. What is the proper response and action? Today, off the record is meaningless as a concept and principle of the media. Our last panel will deal with these among many, many other issues that occur at the interface of the mass media and sports in American society. Nate Boyer is a veteran and former active duty Green Beret, one of those heroes who, when the nation calls for volunteers to be put in harm's way, he stepped forward and said, "Send me." Nate, thank you. And as far as communicating our sincere sentiments in this regard, the words are, of course, inadequate. But anyway, they're the best that we have, so Mr. Boyer, thank you, sir, for your service. But it is the best that we can do under the circumstances. It was Nate Boyer who approached Colin Kaepernick and convinced him that if he was going to protest during the national anthem, some at least would think it less disrespectful if he took a knee rather than sitting atop a cooler or on the bench. We now know that how that worked out, but the important thing is that Nate Boyer stepped up and engaged Colin in the conversation. Nate Boyer is one of our panel members. Dr. Jules Borkoff is Associate Professor of Politics and Government and the Department Chair of Pacific University. He is a former soccer player who has received international recognition and attention for his research on the history and politics of the Olympic Games. Other areas of concentration for him have been social movements, mass media, politics, the suppression of dissent, and environmental politics. He received his PhD from American University in Washington, D.C. His most recent books are in 2014, Activism and the Olympics, Dissent at the Games in Vancouver and London, and in 2013, Celebration, Capitalism, and the Olympic Games. He is also a member of our panel. Our next panel member is Howard Bryant, who is a senior writer at ESPN and the author of 4 books on sports and society, including The Heritage, Black Athletes, A Divided America, and the Politics of Patriotism. Mr. Bryant has been a sports correspondent and commentator for National Public Radio since 2006. He is a member of our panel as well. Mark Spears is a senior writer for ESPN's The Undefeated and is the chairman of the National Association of Black Journalists Sports Task Force, which has the mission of looking at sports through the journalistic prism of Black issues, interests, and outcomes. And last, Mr. Steve Wyche. Steve Wyche is a reporter and broadcast anchor for the NFL Network, and he moderates panel discussions on the acclaimed daily news and analysis program, NFL Total Access. He is a senior writer for NFL.com, the online news and feature outlet for the league. Over his 30-year career as a sports journalist, he has covered a wide variety of sports issues and sports personalities. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome our moderator, Ms. Maureen Smith, and the panel. Thank you.
Well, hi, welcome everybody. Happy to be here, and we're just going to jump right in because I've got 5 heavy hitters, and I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. All 5 of you reach, I'm going to say millions, but Jules, you might not meet, well, you do reach millions with the New York Times. So we reach millions of readers and consumers of sport every day with your writing. So you really play a vital role right now in the conversations that are happening around sport and social issues. So thinking about Colin Kaepernick, less than 1% of NFL players are actually protesting. And yet it's an issue that's being talked about, written about by millions and millions of people in the US and around the world. So I wonder if you could just talk for a minute, each of you, about how we make sense of the enormity around social media when it's really a small number of players that are engaged in activism?
Well, I'll start off. I mean, I'm up here because I was the first person to speak to Colin when he actually sat for the national anthem, and we had the conversation that has led to where we are right now. And in terms of social media, I mean, I think we've seen, no matter what the subject is, if you lob something out there, someone is going to take it and disseminate it a million different ways. I mean, there's a million different perspectives on everything. So athlete activism, and what's going on right now is, to me, a snapshot of what is the tempest of the political society, the cultural tenor of what's going on in the country. So when you have a president who says, oh, these guys need to stand for the national anthem and this and that, well, you're going to have millions of people who are going to say they should. But like you said, it's a small percentage and a very small voice of players who are actually protesting. But that small percentage is what a lot of people hang on to. I have 3 sons in their 20s, so a lot of them are peers with these players. And the fact that Colin Kaepernick took the brave stance that he did, and a few other players hung on to it, that meant a lot to my kids. They found a lot of their information through social media, through me, whatever. But it's allowed me to kind of see, okay, this is the temperature of our youth. This is the temperature of where some things are in our country. So even though it's only a small number of people who are protesting, it has driven NFL owners crazy. It has driven society in 5 or 6 different directions. And Nate, I think your take on this is going to be fantastic, because you spoke to him within days of all this happening. But I just think right now, because of where social media-wise, broad-based media-wise, you can't turn on CNN and not see the first 60 minutes about the president, and whatever he hops on, we hinge on to. And I think this, again, is just an issue that is important to some people for one reason, or important to other people for other reasons.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, we talked about it yesterday, social media, obviously, I think everybody's very aware that it's a blessing and a curse. You know, it's an incredible thing, incredible opportunity. You know, everybody has a voice, and that is also potentially incredibly dangerous, especially when I think a lot of people have little to risk. They can hide behind a handle or an emoji or whatever and say whatever they want and really stir the pot. And then even people with that are very public about that. I mean, you speak, you know, on the president and the news cycles, and like you said, the first 60 minutes of the news is about that, and half of that typically is about something he tweeted or said on social media. And there was an instance recently, and this was with a more liberal-leaning news network, and you know, they were going to have me on. We were going to talk about all this stuff. It was like the first couple weeks of the NFL season this year, and I think a little part of it was because less players were protesting now. I think it's just about 4 players in the league currently, give or take. But the main reason they told me, and they sent me an email, it was the biggest mistake they ever made because I tweeted it, speaking of social media, but they said, well, the president didn't tweet about it yesterday, so we're canceling the segment, you know? And it was just like, and we were going to talk about a lot of the stuff we're talking about today, which is important conversations to continue to have. And the fact that that had so much of an influence on what they were going to report, the information they were going to speak on, or the conversations they were willing to have, is pretty frustrating to me, and I think a lot of people, because that's not, well, at least me, being a service member, that's not what I've fought for. That's not what I want to see happen. And when I expect to, you know, receive information through any sort of media, but typically mainstream, I would think that they would want to be bigger than that, you know, and not just be about selling advertising spots and getting clicks. But, you know, it's complicated, I guess. Is the
Yeah, that was a clickbait decision, huh?
Yeah. Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, well, I actually think it says the number of players that are protesting, I think it says less about Colin Kaepernick than it says about the players themselves. I think that when I consider where we were in 2016 and where we've been pretty much post 9/11, I'm surprised. Well, I think the disappointment is that there aren't more players involved. Let's not forget that the players didn't drive this, that what's really taken place in this country over the past 17, 18 years is the number of wars that we're fighting, combined and colliding with post-Ferguson America, with what was taking place post-Trayvon Martin, and then also with Eric Garner and Tamir Rice and all the police brutality and all the confrontations with African Americans. So when you're looking at Colin taking his knee in 2016, it's not in a vacuum. It is a byproduct of the real tumult that's been taking place here. And so it always sort of drives me a little crazy when we treat this as though it's player-driven. The players are reacting to where we are in this country. And not only the players reacting to where we are, you also have even more players that aren't reacting, and the leagues are reacting to where we are. So to have Colin do what he did was important, and it was significant, and it obviously has been historic. But what was more important has been the reaction to him on both sides. The reaction to the way the league has decided to react, the way the public has decided to react, and the way that his fellow players decided not to react.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the whirlwind that's been swirling around Kaepernick and now other professional athletes protesting in a wide range of sports has something to do with social media for sure. Definitely has something to do with the president's hyperactive Twitter thumbs. But I would point out another key point for me to add to what Howard was saying, and that is the presence of vibrant social movements that are sort of scything out space in front of these athletes to step up and to become athlete activists. And if you think back over the panels that we've had the good privilege of seeing today, you think back to the 1960s, vibrant social movements as concentric circles from the athletes you saw on the stage to the Olympic Project for Human Rights to the wider civil rights movement. And I think you're seeing today vibrant movements, Black Lives Matter. Now we're seeing the Me Too movement. We saw a really important movement coming out of Standing Rock to fight the Dakota Access Pipeline there. And all that activism carried out by ordinary people doing extraordinary things, for me, is vital for understanding why we've seen so much traction here for this round of athlete activism.
I was able to dip my foot in the NFL pool 2 years ago, interviewing Kaepernick kind of on a whim, knowing some people from Oakland when he came to town. But I'm more obviously in the NBA world, and it's been really amazing to me how the NBA players have been much more vocal than NFL players have, and it's more than just Durant and Carmelo Anthony and LeBron, and there's a long list of players, the Warriors as a team, but also they have coaches like Steve Kerr and Greg Popovich, who I think their voices are very important because these are white male voices that have been strong about the injustices in society, and in a lot of ways I think those voices need to be heard louder than the black voices, because perhaps they are listened to more. But it's still really kind of stunning to me that the ones that, not that they're kneeling in the NBA, but the ones that seem to be more vocal about everything is the NBA players more than the NFL.
Well, I want to jump on that because you're probably about to jump on this. NBA players have guaranteed contracts.
Yeah.
NFL players do not. And we have seen through NFL owners this offseason trying to institute a procedural policy on the sideline during the playing of the national anthem. They are trying to take measures that if somebody violates this procedure, which is on hold right now, it's been embargoed, that there could be punishment. There could be, like what happened with Mahmoud in '96. The NBA had a policy, you had to stand for the national anthem. When he made his gesture, they suspended him. The NFL wants to be able to do something like that, even to the point of taking money out of these players' pockets, because contracts are not guaranteed. And I think
I do ask, why aren't the stars of the league? I mean, I understand the guy that's on the practice team or the guy that's the third string cornerback, but where's Beckham? Where's some of the other stars in the league that they're not going to lose their money? They're too good to get pushed out of the door.
And that's why what Colin Kaepernick did was so brave, because he risked it all and now he's losing. His football career is finished. And Other players have seen that. And they're like, I've got 6 or 7 years to play this game. I don't want to go that route. And that's where, be it from the star players, Aaron Rodgers isn't going to get a cut. You know, Odell Beckham, Aaron Rodgers has actually been outspoken on the issue in favor of players exercising their right to protest and to demonstrate. But some of these other players, it is just amazing how they have not stepped up. And that's been, we've heard all the way from the social activism from the 60s to now, that's been that fine line that athletes have had to walk, because it's an individual decision on if you're going to stick your neck out there or not. From what John Carlos and Tommie Smith did with Dr. Edwards and galvanizing people, to what Colin Kaepernick did, which he did alone. He didn't tell anybody he was going to do this. I mean, it seems like this is a generational decision, whether they're social movements or not, for people to risk whatever and how much they're willing to risk.
Well, true. They're individual. I was going to say, I'm going to jump in on that, Steve. I think it's individual, certainly, but I think there's something else here, too, in that there is a pattern. There are a few patterns that you can certainly sense that are traditional. One, as we talked about at the beginning in the morning, you're not going to get a lot from the white male players. The women in the WNBA did a much better job supporting themselves and supporting each other than the men did. The men still haven't been here yet. And so, and on top of that, in addition to that, you also have the fact that these male players, whether it's Aaron Rodgers, I think it's relative. I think Aaron Rodgers being supportive is very different than Aaron Rodgers supporting. He has not stepped out and supported anybody. Neither has Tom Brady, neither has Matt Ryan or Drew Brees or any of them, and they've let their players out that they talk about this. We listen to all of this talk about brotherhood and being in the trenches and we go to war together and all these ridiculously stupid metaphors, but yet they leave the players out. You know, they've left the black players out by themselves, and they've been doing it for 60 years.
That's a great point. Very good point.
I raised the issue with Dr. Edwards backstage before we came out, and we talked about like the risks that players might think they would face if they did the same thing. And he was really great in reminding me, like, Colin Kaepernick had a bravery and a courageousness and character of mind to stand up to police brutality before anyone did. So any player could have done that before he did it. So when they say, well, it's too risky now because look what happened to him, he did that. And so that was a really good reminder to me that any player could have been the one to do that and could have joined him, could have beaten him to the punch. So it's interesting to think about the ways that we could argue or explain why we do or don't take action, support teammates. But I want to ask all of you, like, how much as a journalist or an academic or as a public voice you use these social issues of activism to frame your stories when you're writing about Kaepernick? Like, do you provide statistics on police brutality or information on domestic violence statistics in the US when we're talking about some of these issues to help readers understand, or is that too much to expect from journalists at this point? Would you not be read anymore? I don't know. Mark, we'll start at that end this time.
I write for The Undefeated, which is a site on ESPN where we talk about race and social justice. So I'm supposed to write about that. Encourage and me being more in the NBA world, I've been writing a lot about the lack of blacks in, put whatever blank you want to put in the NBA, lack of black general managers, lack of black coaches, owners, and so kind of pushing a lot of that. Also a lot of social justice things. I mean, I worked with Jemele Hill for a couple months, and obviously she's not shy. I wish she was here with us right now to talk, and she's certainly not shy to say. So it's tough because I do realize that I have Republican followers. I have pro-Trump people that read my stories, and you want to keep it real, and you understand the business side of it too. So sometimes my tweet may be the facts and not an opinion. When I feel like there needs to be opinion, I will, but a lot of times the facts are the facts, and you let the reader determine how they feel about it.
Yeah, so I, in addition to being an academic at Pacific University, I do write for publications, Guardian, Los Angeles Times, New York Times. So I have the good fortune of writing with Dave Zirin occasionally at The Nation. And so I bring my background, academic training, and evidence-driven information to the table. And I think we can have both. I think you can offer statistics and compelling human stories. That's my favorite kind of journalism, to be honest with you. So I think you can definitely do both, and that's what I endeavor to do when I try to write something that's more public-facing and less academic.
Yeah, I think we failed miserably on this issue. I think that to ask the question, have we placed data into our stories? Are we framing these things properly? The answer is absolutely not. Nope. The answer is that we failed as an industry miserably on this story. And the reason why we failed is because we have allowed, I think we've allowed the story to be framed in a way that the story was never meant to be framed. And the story of what Colin did has always been framed in a mass media sense through the eyes of the military, through the eyes of police, and through the eyes of the flag. It's never been framed through the eyes of Colin or the people. And so, because of that, what you get is the framing of the people who run these industries. And the people who run these industries view this not through the eyes of Eric Garner's family, not through the eyes of Colin Kaepernick's protest, not through the eyes of Tamir Rice's family, but through the eyes of what they understand. And what they understand is patriotism. And because of that, that's really the only framework that we've really had. And when you actually get a Steve Wyche who gets out and talks to Colin, you get a different story. When you talk to Mark and you get a different story because he gets to talk to Colin. When you have a few reporters here and there who are willing to say, listen, that's not what this is all about, every now and again you'll get a little bit of what is really happening here. But for the most part, the story you're getting is the lens through which the people run the business. Yeah. And the people who run the business view this through one lens, and that's their comfort. It's the flag. That's it.
I think I want to put some of that on Colin himself. I think we need to hear from him.
Yeah.
We need to hear vulnerability and his truth and why he's doing what he's doing. Not so much in a canned acceptance speech, but in conversations, in more conversations publicly. And I put that on him, not because I think he doesn't do anything. That's not the truth. I put that on him because I think because of what he did, he's taken on a responsibility to be that person, to be that voice for a lot of people. And I encourage and push him to do that because I believe that he can truly be a unifying force in our country. Because from my perspective, which is a different one, different than anybody's, it's hard for someone like me that has served in these other parts of the world, spent time in these countries, and seen and experienced what that flag stands for, what it represents to not just people in camouflage, but to people in these other places. It is a beacon of hope to a lot of people. I don't believe a flag is an oppressive symbol. I've never believed that. I do believe oppression exists in our country, and we need to continue to fight it. And at the same time, journalists can't be the only ones fighting it, and people like me can't be the only ones fighting it in the military. It's got to be the people like Colin who take that leap, but then continue to push and continue to be a voice, but also continue to listen and sit down with those that they maybe disagree with and that have a different perspective and a different experience and upbringing. I think that type of humility people respond to, whether they fundamentally agree or not. And I want to see more of that. I think he has the capacity, he has the ability. I know every journalist in the country would love to sit down and hear from him and speak with him. But beyond just journalists, I think there's a lot of public figures as well. And so I continue to push that.
But do we need Colin Kaepernick to look at what's happening in the world? I don't need Colin Kaepernick to have me look at a dash cam video of what happened to Terrence Crutcher in Oklahoma. I mean, I think that what Colin did was enough, and it's up to us as journalists to follow what's out there. I don't need Colin Kaepernick to tell me to look at the news or to follow anything that's taken place here. I think that it's more important that what leadership really is somebody directs you to something, and then you go on your own as a reporter. And I think what's really happening here, and what we don't talk enough about, we all know it because we're all in the business, is that the level of co-opted, we're co-opted here because the rights holders of our companies, it's very difficult for us to write about subjects where, as journalists, you're also beholden to the business responsibilities that our companies have. The ESPN is completely conflicted with everybody. We're rights holders. We're trying to do journalism over here. We're trying to serve all kinds of fans over here. We're trying to do all of these different things at once, and it makes it very, very difficult. And finally, from a business standpoint, our bosses say, you know what, this is bad for business. We're not going to do it from this perspective. And so I think that makes it really hard. But to me, I think the most important thing, I remember to your point, Mark, when we were talking about the NBA, I did a piece on Carmelo Anthony, and we're did one of those massive like SUVs that the ball players travel in, and he's watching, I think it was Terrence Crutcher, it was Tulsa, it was the Betty Shelby confrontation with Terrence Crutcher. He's watching this on his phone while I'm interviewing him, and he says, that's an assassination. So to Steve's point as well about social media, the moment that we're in, all of these guys are getting involved in this because the media, the social media, these things are going viral, they're seeing all of it, and then they're looking at us and they're saying, well, why aren't you writing about this in terms of the way we're seeing it? So I don't need Colin to tell me that this is happening. What I really need is the courage from us as an industry to write it from a different point of view.
But you know what, you're very, your brilliance isn't the norm. You know what I mean? So you don't
You never saw my SAT score, did you?
Yeah, well, mine was worse. That I barely got into this school. But what my point is, you may not need to hear from him, but I think with what Steve was saying about his sons, when he speaks, so many people listen.
There's no doubt.
He has, 2 million followers.
And when was the last time you spoke to him?
And I think the last time he spoke, and I think it was to me.
It was January 2nd, it was 2017, wasn't it?
About 2 years ago. It was
Yeah.
like October 26, 2016.
Yeah.
That's too long for somebody that has that much power. I don't need to see a Nike commercial with him not even mention anything that we're up here talking about. This is a beautiful crowd, and I'm glad you guys here. If all of a sudden we said yesterday Colin was coming,
it'd be full.
It'd be packed.
Yes. I mean, so to me, I think with all due respect to him, he's wasting a voice. He's wasting the ability to change opinions. He's wasting
the ability to educate,
world.
which
Yes.
is what his initial premise was, to educate. And I agree with Nate, you've been pushing this for a while. We saw an image of Colin Kaepernick for the Nike ad, and woof, his voice could be so much greater than that image, and it could be strategic, whatever he has to say. I do think he carries significant input because look, why do you think the NFL is scared of him? Here's the guy with the big fro who knows that players, fans, whomever, hang on his word. And if he were to come out and say whatever, it would have sway. I don't need him.
I'm saying,
yeah, I'm just saying I don't need him, and I totally agree with everything you said. Because what's been interesting about this is the evolution of what's happened since I spoke to him in 2016, is we have seen in our industry, and this is where we have messed up, for however long, the anthem protest. He wasn't protesting the anthem, he was protesting police brutality, bad housing, things like this, right? So, and But you have started to see, and I would probably say over the past few months, a shift in that to what he was actually protesting. Now players protesting during the playing of the national anthem is kind of the verbiage that's been twisted a little, and it goes from the thing I've heard my whole life. People weren't slaves; they were people who were enslaved, and I think that verbiage is very important. I think that's what we're starting to see a little bit in this industry, and it's funny because as we're here on the 50th anniversary of what John Carlos and Tommie Smith did, I read Dr. Edwards' book again, The Revolt of the Black Athlete. And the same things that we're talking about the handling of the media now are the same things that were mentioned then. You had a certain majority of the mass media that were not having anything about the protest, and things were written and things were said. There was a quote from Brent Musburger, which if he said it today, he would not be working. It was very offensive what he said about Tommie Smith and John Carlos and the movement itself. And then you had a segment of the media, which is probably where a lot of us are, where you're kind of hung in that middle, like we're trying to educate, but we're also trying to do our jobs. And then you had a segment of the media that was like, whatever, we're going to be honest about it, regardless of whose toes that we step on. And it's just very interesting as members of the media. And look, if you go back to the original story I did on Colin Kaepernick, and thank goodness, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but thank goodness I was there to recognize why. Mm-hmm. And if you read in there, I had the point of reference of Mahmoud's struggles in the NBA, of what was going on in society, the fact that we were in the time of the presidential primaries, that we had a summer of Philando Castile and Eric Garner, that was all there. This was the trigger for Colin Kaepernick at age 27 to find his voice. Okay, I tell people, like, where's this evolve? Go read the story, the context. It is laid out for why he did this. 2 years old, and to this day, very few people have piggybacked on that.
Exactly, but the reason for that is, once again, if you think about the filter of sports, the way we cover sports, it looks very, very simple. White owners, white coaches, white media, white season ticket holder, black player. That's the filter.
Yes, it is.
And so because that's the filter, when you're thinking about this from Colin's standpoint, there's only one way that the public through that filter was going to view this, and that was through the lens of that filter. Because if you weren't going to think about it in any other way than troops or patriotism, then you had to think like a black person. You had to think like us. And that wasn't going to happen.
Nope.
Well, thank you, Howard, because I think if we actually did work to do that, we might be able to see how the American flag is a symbol of oppression to so many people in this country. And if we had those kind of dialogues about why it is, then maybe we could start to see that when you want people to pay attention to you and your protest, you do it at a time when people pay attention. So a national anthem is a great time.
It is a great time, but again, this is just why there's CNN, there's MSNBC, and Fox News. We may try to educate, but there are a whole lot of folks who want to stay in that lane. And I think that's where, just be it social media, be it everything else, I think journalism, social media, the way we're steered, because again, me and Nate have been kind of brethren in this, and some of the things he says are just so powerful and mean a lot to me. As somebody who kind of grew up in what would be in Red State, Missouri, I've seen all sides. And to hear him try to educate, and for it to fall so, and us try to educate, and for it to fall on so many deaf ears, I don't think that's going to stop any of us from trying. But again, it's I guess it goes to the point, if Colin even says something, there's going to be people who are going to listen and people who are going to hate.
Right. Well, I'm just wondering, I guess the next question to think about is, with the ways the media is portrayed right now, at least by the president, as fake news. I haven't heard that with sports media yet, but maybe that's coming. But I just wonder if there's a pressure on you covering sport to somehow present some idea or presentation of self as neutral, when in fact these are issues where your opinions really matter and they could really be helpful in shifting perspectives. Like maybe there's some sides that don't actually need to be voiced on some of this, and that's where social media is allowing everyone's voice.
I think that neutral word, I've been thinking about that since the first panel. And, you know, it's interesting. I think that there's a distinct difference between being open-minded, having some perspective, and even standing in the middle of things, and being neutral. I don't think that those are the same things. I think that's part of the issue. I think people believe that being neutral means, well, not being neutral means you have to be all these things or all those things, and on this side of an issue or that side of an issue, this side of politics and all that stuff, and it becomes, you know, a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it becomes frustrating because we stop thinking for ourselves, we stop thinking, we stop learning and trying to discover, what do I actually believe? How do I actually feel about this? Am I listening to this whole situation, this whole story? And am I trying my best? Because I'm never going to be able to understand the experience of a person of color. I'm not going to. I can try to empathize, but I will not know. I don't know what that feels like. I never will. And for me to pretend that I could is ridiculous, I think. So, but what I have to do is continue to listen, continue to engage, especially those people that I feel like I understand the least. I mean, going to Iraq and Afghanistan and being in the special forces, we work alongside Afghans, Iraqis. We fight alongside them. We train with them. We live with them. You know, they become our brothers in arms in a sense. But I still don't fully understand a lot of the customs and cultures. But I think I do empathize with where those come from, where those ideas come from, those beliefs come from, because I've spent time there and I've tried to, well, not tried to, I've actually, you know, lived with them and experienced that. So I just think more and more, we have to have that, we have to do that, and it's okay, I think, to not be all blue or all red. I think it's okay to be purple, and at least consider both sides of arguments. And if there's certain things you feel strongly about and you believe, and you're all in on that, that's great. You should be, if you really believe that, you know, but not because you think you should believe that.
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake that we've made is we have not confronted 9/11 as a phenomenon. I don't think we really look at it for what it has done to this country in terms of how we sell sports, how we package sports, how we project sports. And especially in that the idea that watching a sporting event when you have 2 wars going on at least, how many wars are we fighting right now? When you have 39% of the countries in this world involved in this global war on terror. This idea that having a football game and having the flag across the entire field to start a game, having a flag across the outfield to start a game, having the military on the field and having the military paying to be on the field, and having the sports teams not even disclose that all that stuff is recruiting, that it's not even real, it's business, it's marketing. To treat that as neutral is a mistake, and then to have Colin Kaepernick come out and call that political. That, to me, is one of the biggest failings, if not the biggest failing, of how we've covered this story. We treat the protester as if he or she is the problem and not pay attention to this massive militarization and weaponizing of both the American flag and of people's patriotism. How many times have we heard people say that maybe Colin doesn't even belong in this country? We treat all of this as if it's neutral. And then we look at the player and we say, well, what's the matter with you? Why are you politicizing our game? And we don't deal with that.
I think all that points up the perhaps counterintuitive idea that in fact neutrality can be a form of bias. And it's not just climate change when you talk about, especially when neutrality takes the form of balance. Same thing with the Kaepernick story. Kaepernick and the athletes say it's about these issues, police brutality in the community, inequality overall among people of color. And then some guy says, oh, it's disrespect, it's about trying to disrespect the flag intentionally. When you put those two things together in the journalistic norm of balance, it's actually a form of bias. So I would just say in some instances, neutrality can counterintuitively be actually biased.
Yep, agreed. And I think there's also something else here that I think needs at least some level of explication. And that is, it's okay to criticize the military. It's all right. You know, it's not, we are in a place right now where if you look at from the beginning of 9/11 to now, over $5.5 trillion have been spent on this. We just passed a $717 billion defense budget. And yet, the minute you look at any sort of protest, the very first thing the players do is they run back and say, well, I'm not criticizing the troops. No, you don't have to criticize the troops. But you should certainly look at who we are in this world. You talk about this flag being a symbol for people. What exactly is that symbol, and what's happening to us as a country? And I think that these are the things, and a lot of it is being sold through sports. And I talked to General Russell Honoré. We had a great conversation when I was working on my book, 3-star general. It was wonderful in the Katrina cleanup. And he had said, you know, I said, look, I'm not sure I want my 12-year-old being surreptitiously recruited by the Army because he's watching a Red Sox game. And he said, well, you need to hold on to them little SOBs as long as you can because that's how we man the force. And if some 14-year-old, some little kid watching a Dallas Cowboys game sees an F-14 fly over and decides that he wants to serve his country, then that's okay because we can't get this kind of advertising anywhere else.
And that goes to the notion, as those of us who cover sports, who've dealt with sports, there's two elements in Americana that an 8th grade dropout can have a conversation with somebody with a Stanford law degree, and that's sports and entertainment. So again, that piggybacks because they know that someone who's not very educated or whatever can talk about the Red Sox or talk about the 49ers with somebody who is highly educated. So if they're able to manipulate that type of mindset through whatever means, I mean, that's a way to potentially strike at the heart of the matter. But to get to the question of do we feel pressure to cover things certain ways, I work for the NFL Network, and the first 3 letters are who own my network. 32 owners, or 31 owners in the Packers. And so there is a constant battle of what we're going to go after and what we're not. And I've never been told, no, like don't pursue that. The message was, if we're going to break news, if we're going to be on it, let's be first because it's going to be out there anyway. But at the same time, it's always that battle of you're covering somebody who signs your paycheck.
Well, that's right. And how can you cover something? How can we really call that journalism when we are really in a position where we're beholden to the people we cover? It's really difficult.
It's difficult, but at the same time, there's Colin Kaepernick.
Exactly. Well,
and it was news, and I wasn't told, hey, we're holding this because this is going to infuriate season ticket holders.
Yeah.
Go with it. Let's push it. We wrote it. Let's see where this evolves to. I was never told to let my foot off the gas. Yeah. But I'm sure there are instances where they're like,
yeah.
We're not going to talk about this concussion loss.
Well, that's right. Well, I've never been told either, but I think we all know also that we self-censor. We know what's going to fly. We know what's not going to fly. If we went out there tomorrow and you wanted to do a story on Colin Kaepernick through the eyes of Tamir Rice's mother, would the NFL Network run that story?
Yeah, it's a great question. I might have to propose it. I might have to ask.
Right?
Because I don't care.
I mean, when you're in that business, when we're in the building, we know better, and our editors know better.
Correct.
And so, in a lot of ways, they don't have to tell us what to write and what not to write.
And part of that, to get to a larger point, is I don't have a person of color above me to say, you know what, this is an interesting take on this.
No.
And that's another part of our industry that we probably don't have time for here, is that we don't have a lot of people of color directing, in terms of directing the decision making of what's good, what's bad, regardless of if we're covering a league that's about 80% black in terms of players.
So many, to your point, I had a piece today on DeAndre Ayton, and where you wish there were more people of color. Like if I could go back, I would have been an editor or a TV station manager, and I had been fighting with these guys, and DeAndre Ayton's the #1 pick in the draft. He's from the Bahamas. I'm like, okay, this Sports Center feature we did is great. We need some Bahamian music here.
Exactly, right.
We need some Bahamian, and they struggled to get something. So they put something together, and I just finally gave up. I tried, and I sent it to a journalist who was from the Bahamas, and he's like, man, that music you guys got in there is from Jamaica, man. It ain't from but the thing that's like tough is that there's just not a lot of people. Like, I'm lucky at the Undefeated that my boss is black, but like I remember being in the Sports Center studio in LAPC in LA, and when LeBron called Trump a bum, it was like, all right, Mark, you're here.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll talk about it.
You know what, Mark? I was going to say, you know that I've been writing. I think my first book came out in 2002, right? 16 years I've been writing books, and I think even at ESPN in the business as well. On the book side, I've never had a black male at any of the publishing companies. I've had one black woman editor, and in the business, I'm old, right? Oakland Tribune, 28 years now? Never had a black editor.
And real quick, I never tried to say it, but even on the on-air or kind of beat writer process, Mark knows this. I used to cover the NBA. That's where Mark and I met. That's almost like the stash spot for black journalists. And as we know in the NFL, you turn on NFL Network, you see so many black people on air, but they're all former players. And in terms of our industry nationwide, is myself and Jim Trotter, both of us Howard University graduates who work at the NFL Network, as well as Tiffany Blackman and Josina Anderson at ESPN. That's it.
And we replace each other, don't we? Because
we replace each other. There's the black spot.
You went to Atlanta, and then I came over. It's the black spot.
That's why Mr. Roden, who you guys saw earlier, is such a legend. Like, he had a column at the New York Times.
That's right.
And I wanted to be Mr. Roden for so long, and then I just got stuck in this NBA bubble that I couldn't get out of. But there needs to be more Mr. Rodens. There need to be more Mrs. Rodens, females running as well. There's just not enough. Like any woman out here wants to be a sports journalist, the whole field is your oyster now because they need you. And they need that voice. They need the woman's voice, not just the black voice. They need the woman's voice, and hopefully that will change.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank all of you for your...
That's it. Done.
Yeah, service on this panel. It was great, and some terrific points and just all your perspectives, but all the work you do every day talking about this and engaging with the public, I really appreciate it on a personal level, and it's great for my students. So thank you so much for helping to wrap up, sort of seeing the ways that Colin Kaepernick connects to what Smith and Carlos did 50 years ago, and that we're still talking about the same issues that they were protesting should really give us some pause to think about what's happening today. So thank you very much.
Well done.
And I'm going to ask Dr. Edwards to come back to the stage to wrap things up for the day.
Great job.
There's so much to be learned, so much to be disseminated, so much work yet to be done. I'm always struck by references to Colin Kaepernick and the fact that he was a quarterback during a protest and becoming politicized and making political statements. But the first quarterback that I knew to become politicized and make political statements was a scholarship quarterback to Southern University by the name of H. Rap Brown. He was a football player who followed in the footsteps of his brother, who was a member of SNCC, began to protest and demonstrate, and literally the rest is history. He was also a force with the Olympic Project for Human Rights, because once he supported it, it became possible for young militant people who had begun to separate from Dr. King to begin to look again at Dr. King because of his stand relative to the Olympic Project for Human Rights and his support for that and his stand on Vietnam. But the catalyst in that was a quarterback who became politicized by the name of H. Rap Brown. So I have seen this before. So even as we try to understand and wrap our minds around the fourth wave of athlete activism, framed up by the Black Lives Matter movement and the efforts of Colin Kaepernick and Michael Bennett and Malcolm Jenkins and all of the athletes involved in the Athletes Coalition and LeBron James and D. Wade and Carmelo Anthony and Maya Moore and Tina Charles of the WNBA. Let's understand that this is all part of history and it is ongoing. And to give you a hint of where we are, the developments and dynamics that presage a fifth wave of athlete activism already well this side of the sports political horizon. And this time it's going to involve women because the Me Too movement is going to be one of the most powerful movements ever to take place in American society. And women are going to be in the forefront of it. The main thrust of the fifth wave of athlete activism still lies before us, however, despite the Me Too influence on the athletes who've stood up and talked about being sexual assaulted at various universities and so forth. The main thrust is still in front of us. We are all the more involved in this struggle, and what makes it inevitable is the impact that developments are going to have since they're on Title IX and its implementation. We all are aware that Title IX was implemented in 1972 as a consequence of the actions and activities and efforts of people such as the great Billie Jean King, Martina Navratilova, and others. What there is far less cognizance of is the impact of Roe v. Wade and the numerous clinics serving women that were reinvigorated or that sprang up in the wake of Roe v. Wade, like Planned Parenthood and other facilities serving women. This gave colleges and universities and professional sports teams and the Olympic training facilities and so forth some assurance that if they gave a woman, athlete, a scholarship or a contract in September, that they would be around in March to play in the NC2A basketball tournament, or in June to run in the NC2A track and field finals, or to participate in the Olympic trials or in the Olympic Games. The assaults on Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood constitute an existential threat to the existence of women's sports. This is going to be a major factor galvanizing women athletes around the Me Too movement and the fact that the WNBA has already pledged $5 from every ticket to go to Planned Parenthood. These are simply first salvos in what is already an emerging fifth wave of athlete activism. So where and when does all of this end? As long as there is faith in and commitment to the mandate in the preamble to the United States Constitution that obligates we, the people, to struggle to form that more perfect union, movements in sports reflecting that broader struggle will continue. That preamble doesn't say we, the Congress. It doesn't say we, the legislators or governors. It doesn't say we, the mayors or city assemblies. It doesn't even say we, the courts. And it most certainly doesn't say we, the presidents. It says we, the people. Based upon that, movements are in the DNA of American democracy. Old Sam Adams and his Sons of Liberty movement wasn't a British government program when they threw 342 boxes of tea into Boston Harbor. The abolitionist movement, the labor movement, the women's suffrage movement, the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, the environmental movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement, most certainly the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement, the gay rights movement. None of these were government programs. This was an expression. All of these were expressions of that commitment to form that more perfect union by we the people. And it says we the people, not we the people with the exception of athletes. And so from the beginning, as we've tried to show on these various panels, athletes have made a central and critical contribution. So today we need to understand where we have been in order to truly wrap our minds around where we are headed, both within the arena and beyond. We have been through worse, and in every case, thanks to we the people, we have come out better. I see a lot of hand wringing about, oh my God, what are we going to do? These are awful times. My goodness, what are we going to do about what's happening in Washington, D.C.? Oh my God, you got less than 1% of the athletes taking a knee in professional football and speaking out in other sports. What are we going? You know what? We've been through worse and have come out better. We went through a bloody civil war that killed more Americans than all of the other wars America has been involved in combined. But we came out better. We went through a bloody labor movement, but we came out with the 8-hour day, vacations, a minimization, elimination of child labor. We came out better. We went through a civil rights movement that killed 3 times as many people from the turn of the 20th century until the death of Dr. Martin Luther King as were killed in the attack on the Twin Towers by terrorists. But we came out of it better. We went through an anti-war movement that split families and divided the nation, but we came out of it better. We're going to be just fine. These movements, these activities are going to continue. We're going to have wave after wave of athlete involvement in this society because that is what we, the people, do. We're going to be just fine. Let's just get over it and get on with it. And I think that that is one of the messages that we've tried to send to you today. Thank you so much for your attendance, and we deeply appreciate your presence.